Chapter 456. The battle in the sky was getting more and more intense. Bursting fireballs, magma fireballs, and meteor showers poured down from the sky like raindrops, leaving pits and hollows on the ground. Molten magma flowed freely everywhere. Soros carefully made his way through the dense rain of meteors. He had to dodge the incoming fireballs every now and then. In such a cruel and harsh battlefield, he could be blasted out of the sky if he was not careful, becoming a part of the scorched earth. He flapped his wings and drew a huge circle in the sky. Inside the circle was a terrifying sea of fire that emitted a dazzling red light. Normally, the sea of fire was on the ground, but this sea of fire was 30 meters above the ground. Because the fire element in the sea of fire was too strong and active, it had seriously interfered with his vision and spiritual perception. He had no idea what was happening inside. Only when the bat wings on his back were fully repaired by the blood energy did he grit his teeth and barge in, attempting to launch an assault on the tall Balrog standing on the back of the wind dragon. He only had a short 2 to 3 seconds to attack. If he stayed in the sea of fire for too long, the bat wings on his back would be burned to tatters and riddled with holes. If that happened, he could only howl and fall from the sky, becoming a scarlet knight who could not fly. At this time, there was only one knight left in the sky. The other scarlet knight was whipped by the Balrog's flaming whip and fell to the ground, never to fly again. In the battlefield of two powerful magi, one did not even have the right to participate in the battle without his wings. Soros could only carefully protect his wings, occasionally breaking into the sea of fire to launch powerful semi-ranged attacks on the Balrog with his bloody spear. Inside the sea of fire battlefield, Grim was perched high on the back of the wind dragon, trying his best to maintain the flame barrier's continuous damage to Mary. At the same time, he was shooting out scorching rays from his eyes, closely chasing after the beautiful figure that was constantly changing her position in the air. The battle had lasted for half an hour, and both Grim and Mary had sustained serious injuries. With high agility, Mary was the most troublesome assassin when it came to maneuvering and dodging in narrow areas. Spells that took more than 3 seconds to chant were useless in front of her, unless you were sure that your external defense spell could last until the end of the chant. Otherwise, recklessly attempting to cast a large-scale spell would be suicidal. As for those single-target powerful witchcraft, the chances of them catching up to her agile and changeable body were not high. Even if you used your spiritual power to lock onto her position, the spell you cast would only destroy the realistic illusion she left behind. When necessary, once Mary felt that she couldn't escape, she could even use her strange blood witchcraft to exchange places with a Scarlet Knight. Although this would cause her to temporarily lose a useful subordinate, it would ensure her own safety and the integrity of her combat strength. Despite having so many advantages, Mary still suffered a big blow. The biggest threat to her was, of course, that hateful flame barrier. As long as she was in the sea of fire, her body would constantly be burned by the violent flames. If it was just ordinary flames, with Mary's resistance as an elite wizard, she would not be able to suffer much damage. However, at this moment, the elemental flames had an attack strength of 60 degrees, and it seemed to have a hateful effect of burning the soul. This meant that when she passed through the sea of fire, she had to constantly urge the Scarlet Knight to protect the bat wings behind her. However, no matter how tight her defense was, the depths of her soul would still sting from time to time, as if someone was holding an invisible needle and constantly stabbing her soul. Although the intensity was not high, it was extremely disgusting. The bat wings on Mary's back had become tattered, and there were scorch marks and holes left by the flames everywhere. As for her slender and tall body, a large area of the flames had licked it, and there were bloody holes on her shoulders and thighs caused by the scorching rays. It was no longer the early stage of the battle. She could extravagantly use the blood energy to heal her wounds. In order to preserve her combat strength in this battle, Mary could not bear to waste her blood energy to heal these insignificant injuries. Only when a vital part of her body was injured would she be forced to indulge in a little extravagance. After all, she could not find any food here that could help her recover her blood energy. Without the nourishment of blood, many of the vampire wizard's signature fighting techniques could not be used. This also greatly restricted Mary's combat strength. Of course, as her loyal servant, the old fox, Venlier, had long gone to the surrounding area to complete a hunt and brought back a horned goat. Unfortunately, such a spoil of war could not be sent into the Sea of Fire. As soon as it returned to the battlefield, it was blasted into pieces by an explosive fireball that shot out from the depths of the Sea of Fire. Grimm's fireball exploded with just the right amount of power and did not hurt Winlier at all. Thus, the battle was in a stalemate. At this point in the battle, the pressure that Grimm was under was not any less than Mary's. Maintaining the flame barrier for a long time had caused Grimm's fire energy to run out. If it was not for the pure fire energy that the flame demon's heart would send out from time to time, Grimm would have to withdraw his line of defense to protect himself. He silently stood in the depths of the Sea of Fire and cooperated with the Wind Dragon's wind barrier to defend against Mary's continuous sneak attack. As for his various defenses, they had already been destroyed in the previous battle. Now, only a damaged lava shield and energy shield were left. On Grimm's huge body, there were also 3 large wounds visible to the naked eye. Inside the wounds, traces of blood energy could be vaguely seen entangling with the raging fire energy. Before the blood energy was neutralized, the wounds could not heal by themselves. However, even though it was so difficult, Grimm still did not command the Wind Dragon to unleash its unique dragon aura, nor did he perform the second transformation of the Flame Demon. Grimm had a feeling that Mary was hiding part of her combat power and killing moves, and was looking for a chance to turn the situation around. To avoid being caught off guard, he could only do his best to keep his trump card in hand and wait for the moment when Mary would attack. 2 of the 3 Blood Knights had been knocked down from the sky. Although they did not die, they had temporarily lost their ability to attack. The remaining knights seemed to be quite intelligent, unlike the other 2 who were straightforward. That was why Grimm had tried to cripple him a few times, but it was all in vain. Moreover, the Scarlet Knight's grasp of timing was simply superb. Although the knight's battle skills did not really hurt Grimm, it created the perfect opportunity for Mary to attack. That time, Grimm had to use half of the instant spells in the Voodoo Secret Scroll to force Mary to retreat. Facing an agile assassin who could come and go like a shadow, it was impossible to cast powerful area of effect spells, and single-target spells could be easily dodged. Therefore, apart from Grimm's flame barrier and many instantaneous small fire spells, it was almost impossible for other spells to harm Mary's body. Moreover, at the edge of the Sea of Fire, there was a bloody knight who was waiting for him. Once Grimm revealed a flaw, this fearless desperado would definitely use his own life to open up a path for Mary to attack. That was why Grimm could not focus all of his spiritual force on Mary. Although the situation was difficult to predict, Grimm's chances of winning were increasing. Of course, the main reason was that the AI chip had finished collecting data on Bloody Mary. In front of him, Mary was no longer a cloud of immeasurable hazy blood mist. Instead, she had truly returned to her original appearance. Mary, vampire, rank 1 bloodline wizard. Body, strength, 7, agility, 16, vitality, 11, spirit, 7, combat spells mastered. Blood arrow, rapid charge, blood shackles, life drain, vampiric touch, blood mist, blood berserk, blood claw, blood conversion, blood contract. Seeing Mary's combat spells projected by the AI chip made Grimm's head hurt. From the beginning of the battle until now, Mary had repeatedly cast blood spells in the double digit. This showed that Mary's talent in combat was so high that it left Grimm speechless. Melee wizards were different from elemental wizards. Elemental wizards mainly focused on standing still. Although they had some high mobility spells, they mainly used long-range elemental attack. Close combat wizards also had a large number of spells, but these spells were rarely long-range attack spells. Most of them were close combat support spells. Therefore, after losing Ojwa's lava shield, Grimm could only fight with speed against an assassin-type opponent who kept sneaking up on him and launching surprise attacks. He could only use quick spells to force the opponent back. When the battle reached a point where both of them could not continue, Mary, who had been using guerrilla tactics, finally took out her trump card, Blood Shackles. When she raised her head towards the sky and let out a strange shriek, shackles of blood tightly bound her to the 4 blood thralls at the scene. She then rushed to Grimm's side without a care for her own safety. Although he was prepared for this, Grimm was still shocked by Mary's determination and bravery. In the next second, a storm of fire spells rained down on Mary. The wind dragon under Grimm flapped its wings and created a huge tornado, blocking Mary's advance. Chapter 457. Blood Shackles. As the name suggested, this was a witchcraft used by high-ranking blood breeds to control their blood slaves. When used, it needed to be coordinated with the blood contract to share damage and siphon energy. This also meant that as long as there were blood slaves alive, Mary, as the controller of the blood contract, would be able to stand tall forever. Through the blood shackles, the blood energy within the bodies of the 4 subordinates continuously flowed towards Mary, allowing her to successfully break through the elemental firewalls with fire spells as the core. She was now within 10 meters of Grimm. If it was in the past, the scorching rays and flame jet spray, coupled with the constant burning of the fire barrier, would have dealt an astonishing 140 degrees of fire damage to Mary's body. Even with Mary's resistance, she would not be able to last more than 2 seconds under such a powerful attack. Otherwise, her life force would be damaged and her body would be severely injured. In the past, Mary could only rely on her agility to dodge when faced with this level of witchcraft defense. She would even give up on attacking if she wanted to. However, at this moment, Mary acted as if she had been injected with chicken blood. Not only did she not dodge, she retracted her bat wings and pounced towards Grimm like a moth flying into a flame. In the next second, a bloody mist exploded in front of Grimm. The thick, blood-red mist surged and engulfed Grimm's body like a berserk beast. Mary's aura disappeared in an instant as she completely blended into the bloody mist. In the center of the bloody mist, there seemed to be a wild storm that could destroy the heavens and earth. The storm engulfed the bloody mist and pushed it outwards, and in the process of extending and expanding, it was constantly spinning, shaking, and churning. The mist was thick and scarlet like blood. Grimm and Mary's figures could no longer be seen clearly. They could only judge the intensity of the battle through the violent shaking of the bloody mist. The violent and ferocious explosions did not stop, and waves of flames continuously overflowed from within. However, no matter how much they raged, they could not blow away the terrifying bloody mist that covered the sky. The situation inside could not be seen, but the changes outside were shocking enough. Soros, Wendler, and the other 3 suddenly screamed at the sky. Their skin cracked and their flesh was scorched. Their bodies withered at a speed visible to the naked eye. Wendler was the weakest among them. When the bloody energy in his body suddenly flowed towards the source of his bloodline, it was as if a sluice gate had been opened. He immediately fell to the ground, and his aura became extremely weak. Soros was indeed the most powerful blood knight under Mary's command. Although he suffered such a huge change, he still knelt on one knee and held onto his sword, silently enduring the source of his bloodline demand for power. While he endured the loss of power, waves of scorching flame energy continuously flowed into his body through the illusory blood shackles. While he endured the power loss, waves of scorching flame energy continuously entered his body through the illusory blood shackles. Wherever the high-temperature flames passed, blood vessels twisted and ruptured, muscles and bones scorched and withered, flesh and blood quickly carbonized, and even the skin on the surface of the body quickly cracked and disintegrated, but not a single drop of blood flowed out. If it was not for the extraordinary life force that the vampires' outstanding magic resistance, they would have been burnt to ashes the moment the flame energy entered their bodies. Even so, with Soros' powerful strength, he could only grit his teeth and hold on. He silently prayed that his master could quickly win this battle. Even so, with Soros' powerful strength, he could only grit his teeth and hold on. He silently prayed that his master could quickly win this battle. However, at this moment, the berserk Bloody Mary had also encountered an unexpectedly powerful enemy. She had long since lagged behind in collecting information about Grimm. The last time she encountered Grimm, he could only transform into a Balrog once. Although he was very powerful, most of his strength came from the elemental puppet. Therefore, when Bloody Mary absorbed the bloody energy in the bodies of her subordinates, she only needed to bear less than a quarter of Grimm's damage. Wendler was too weak to bear much of the damage. She immediately turned from a treacherous assassin to a berserk wild warrior. The blood-red energy was attached to her sharp and curved claws, turning her hands into terrifying magic tools. His every movement, stabbing, poking, and scratching were all so smooth, and he was successful in every endeavor. Even the fire shield, which had a fire intensity of up to 80 degrees, was no match for Mary's terrifying claws. She pierced through it and tore it into pieces. The wind whirlpool created by the wind dragon also injured Mary greatly. Tens of thousands of blade-like whirlwinds gathered together and formed a solid barrier around the wind dragon, protecting the Balrog that Grimm had transformed into. If Mary wanted to attack Grimm, she would have to take the risk of passing through this barrier. Hence, when Bloody Mary stood on top of the wind dragon, drenched in blood, and slowly approached Grimm step by step, her image could only be described as pitiful. Mary looked like she had just been fished out of a knife formation. There was not a single piece of uninjured flesh on her body. Her entire body was covered in curling wounds and fine scratches. Viscous purple blood kept flowing down, almost dyeing her whole body in blood. However, as the bloody energy crazily surged into her body, the powerful recovery ability of the vampires also showed. Mary walked towards Grimm with light step. Before she had even taken 2 steps, the tiny scratches on her body had already healed, and the horrifying wounds on her body were also slowly closing up. The blood that had flowed out did not disperse. Instead, it turned into a thick blood mist and merged back into her body. It had to be said that Bloody Mary was simply unbeatable when it came to dealing with physical damage. The distance between her and Grimm was less than 3 meters. For an assassin with high agility, this was already an intimate distance where they could hear each other's breaths. The wind barrier had been broken through, the lava shield had disappeared, the fire shield was almost depleted, the lava armor had also suffered a large amount of damage, the energy shield was as thin as a piece of paper in front of an elite assassin. At this point, it could be said that the defensive spells that Grimm had set up were almost completely destroyed. If he wanted to continue fighting, he would have to personally face this berserk Bloody Mary. Just surrender, Grimm. Looking at Grimm, Mary's scarlet eyes shone like the red sun. At this distance you are no match for me. Are you so sure? Grimm's face that was made of fire revealed a strange smile. You should know that I will never surrender. Why? Is it because of your so-called male pride? Mary curled her lips in disdain. You also know that I have always liked you. As long as you admit that I am stronger than you, I can become your only lover, and even help you realize your little dream. Grimm was slightly stunned. He did not expect Mary to say such words when she thought that she had the upper hand. However, he immediately shook his head and got rid of this inexplicable emotional disturbance. The reason why I rejected you is not because of my male pride, but you did not defeat me at all. With a low, muffled roar, Grimm's tall and sturdy fire demon body expanded once again. The flame barrier protecting his body suddenly turned from scarlet to purplish black, and a strange energy started to burn Mary's body. When Grimm unlocked the fire demon's heart and completed his second transformation, the wind dragon raised its neck and let out a long roar, and a shocking dragon aura surged towards Mary. Although vampires were considered high-level magical creatures, their bloodline was naturally inferior to the dragons at the top of the food chain. Thus, facing the terrifying dragon aura at such a close distance, Bloody Mary's mind was dizzy even though she had outstanding resistance. She could not move for a full 3 seconds. Taking advantage of this time, Grimm's 4-meter-tall fire demon body expanded once again, and in an instant, he turned into a 6-meter-tall terrifying flaming monster. Then, he stooped down, reached out his huge lava hand, and held Mary in his hand. The terrifying burning domain instantly dispersed the bloody mist around Mary's body. The huge hand made of lava and flames grabbed her tightly. It didn't crush her into minced meat, nor did it use the terrifying energy flames to burn her body. "Now it's my turn to ask you, Mary." A large image of Grimm appeared on the huge lava head. "You have already been defeated by me. Now it's time for you to surrender." At this moment, Mary had already broken free from the dragon aura and was struggling angrily. It was a pity that her body's strength was extremely high, but her strength was only a mere 7 points. On the other hand, Grimm's fire demon body had a terrifying 12 points of strength. Although he was still not as strong as those body refiners who mainly focused on strength, it was not a problem for him to imprison an agile assassin. "You're delusional." The sudden change in status made Mary extremely angry. With her personality, she would never be willing to become someone's servant who would come and go as he pleased. Hence, even though Grimm's berserk strength and energy flames were ready to be unleashed, she still recklessly tried to mobilize the bloody energy in her body. Grimm sighed bitterly and raised a finger. An extremely condensed energy flame condensed at the tip of his finger, and he drew 4 strokes in the air beside Mary. Asterisk whoosh 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 whoosh. Asterisk using the AI chip's elemental vision, Grimm cleanly cut off Mary's external aid. The blood shackles had been broken. Mary, who was already an arrow at the end of its flight, suddenly cried out in alarm. "They are all good servants for you. You'd better cherish them and not waste them on meaningless internal strife." Ugh! Just as he finished lecturing, Grimm's consciousness shifted, and he realized that the intense tremors from the contract had caused Mary to lose consciousness. She had fallen into a deep coma. Cough! Grimm, who had transformed into a tall fire demon, looked down at the messy battlefield and the 4 pitiful figures that had fallen to the ground. He could not help but sigh. Chapter 458. Her head was dizzy. When Mary regained consciousness again, she was already in a quiet and peaceful bedroom. The bed was soft, and the silky bedding even had a familiar body odor. When Mary opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was the ceiling illuminated by the light. This was a stone tower, and the ceiling was naturally made of stone as well. The surface of the ceiling was smooth and flat, a grayish-white color. There were also tiny metallic particles within. With such obvious external characteristics, Mary was able to identify its composition at a glance. This was iron rock, an ordinary stone commonly used to build tall buildings. Although iron rock was a type of natural ore, its hardness was not inferior to that of magic iron alloy. If not for the fact that it lacked the necessary elemental resistance, it would have been one of the best materials to build the wizard's pagoda. But at that moment, the bright elemental light on the ceiling illuminated a tall and imposing figure. Mary tilted her head and immediately saw the familiar back of the figure at the side of the house. The sky outside the tower was filled with stars. In front of the narrow window, Grimm was sitting upright. A black wizard robe was draped over his body, his dark red hair flowing behind him. He was silently sprawled over the desk, quickly copying something. Mary closed her eyes to examine herself. The dried-up blood energy in her body had recovered slightly, and the many wounds on her body had disappeared. Her skin had once again returned to its original pink and smooth state. Mary gently licked her red lips, the sweet scent of blood rippling between her teeth. He could almost taste the unique spiciness of the flame energy in it. In the next second, Mary's crimson eyes opened again. She had already silently appeared behind the tall figure. Gently brushing aside her dark red hair, Mary could not help but swallow with difficulty as she looked at the fair and lustrous neck of the other party. The other party's body was filled with energy. To Mary, who had an empty stomach and was burning with hunger, he was the perfect prey. Under the urging of her instincts, a dark green glow appeared deep within Mary's crimson eyes. 2 bloody fangs protruded from her upper lips, as if she was about to pierce into the blood vessels in the other party's neck. "You're awake." Grimm did not even turn his head as he continued to write lines of mysterious runes on the parchment. "Come take a look. This is a set of magic tattoos that I designed for you. Once activated, your agility will increase by 1 or 2 points." Grimm sensed the life aura behind him, but he didn't seem to notice Mary's abnormality. Instead, he continued to explain the advantages of this set of magic tattoos. However, the strange thing was that his deep and calm voice seemed to have a magical power. It actually helped Mary get rid of the restlessness in her blood and once again restored the mind that a wizard should have. "You beat me," Mary said calmly. Grimm stopped explaining and fell into silence. He really wanted to comfort her, but he knew that any kind of comfort could easily be interpreted as pity, so he could only stay silent awkwardly. "Where are my subordinates?" After getting rid of her obsession with winning, Mary finally started to care about her subordinate. Although she did not drain every trace of their blood-colored energy during the battle, the huge amount of energy she drained could easily cause their bodies to disintegrate. This was especially so for the old fox, Venlier. He had turned from a handsome young noble back to his old self. "Their situation isn't too good, but they're still vampires trained by you. As long as they have enough blood, there's no injury that they can't recover from." Mary's mental power slightly coiled around, and she could see the situation inside the stone tower at a glance. In a secret room on the 2nd floor of the stone tower, 4 of her subordinates were lying on the bodies of beautiful naked women, piercing their sharp fangs into the blood vessels in their neck. These beautiful women's eyes were all rolled up, their expressions distorted and excited, as if they were immersed in extreme happiness. In the corner of the room, there were a few withered and shriveled female corpses. Their skin was so wrinkled that they looked like dried corpses. The blood in their bodies had been sucked dry by the vampires, leaving not a single drop behind. Mary retracted her spiritual force in satisfaction and once again focused on Grimm. "Tell me, what's up with your power? Where did the Lord of the Flames go? How did it become a wind dragon? Also, what's up with that wind dragon? How did it unleash the draconic aura unique to dragons?" After being separated for so long, Mary felt extremely unfamiliar with everything around Grimm. She could not wait to understand and grasp this mysterious man once more. Thus, Grimm could only describe his encounters after leaving the Plain of Nights to Mary. From the short family war, to the mysterious and powerful Sky City, to Alice's struggle for fate, to the Flame Monarch's wizard's pagoda. "Did Alice give you that dragon crystal?" Mary suddenly asked. After hearing so much, Grimm had thought that Mary would be concerned about the family or the Flame Monarch. He did not expect her first question to be about the strange dragon crystal. Yes, damn it, that little girl couldn't have foreseen something in advance, right? Otherwise, why would she give you that dragon crystal at the right time? The red light in Mary's eyes flickered again, and she looked like she was gnashing her teeth in hatred. Ugh! Grimm could not help but feel speechless. The witches of destiny can't be that strange, right? How could she have foreseen something that happened a year ago so far? Humph, that must be it. Otherwise, how could I have fallen for your draconic aura so easily? Do you think that Alice could have foreseen our conversation? The more she thought about it, the more she felt that it made sense. A dangerous glint appeared in Mary's eyes once again. She grabbed Grimm's collar and pulled him in front of her. The two of them stared at each other, nose to nose, eyes to eyes. I won't let that lass have the upper hand." With that, she sealed Grimm's mouth with her tender red lips. Under the illumination of the lights, Mary's slender and tall figure was embedded in Grimm's back. A strange, charming sound suddenly rang out in the room. When Grimm woke up from his sweet dream, the sky was already bright. Mary was nowhere to be seen on the messy bed, but her scent still lingered on the silk quilt and mattress. Grimm had sat up too abruptly, and he felt a sharp pain in his waist as if it was about to break. Apart from the pain, there was also endless soreness and powerlessness. But when he recalled how wild and hot Mary was last night, Grimm immediately felt an itch in his heart. An irrepressible impulse made him feel hot again. Grimm forced himself off the bed and scanned the entire stone tower with his mental power. Strangely, he could not find Mary. Even the subordinates on the second floor of the stone tower had disappeared without a trace. But his mental power was not completely undetectable. Grimm took a step forward, and the raging flames on his naked body disappeared in a flash. The remnants of last night's passion had also disappeared. Grimm took a set of clothes from the wooden rack beside him and put them on. He slowly walked to the wooden table and saw Mary's handwriting on the top piece of parchment. "I'm going to talk to Alice." What was this? Was he going to declare his sovereignty or catch up with an old friend? Grimm held the parchment with a helpless expression on his face. Mary's daring personality deeply attracted him, but her overly indulgent temperament made him feel helpless. She had always been a maverick, and most of the time, her actions dominated her thoughts. She did such a big thing without discussing it with him, and she did it so confidently. Grimm could not help but feel a little annoyed, but then he began to daydream. The relationship between him and Alice was both official and private, and there was some ambiguity in it. But it was different from the pure relationship between him and Mary. So what would happen if Mary and Alice met? He did not know the consequences, but he really wanted to know. In the wilderness far away, Mary was flapping her wings and flying quickly. Behind her were Winlear, Soros, and the others. Below them there was a gray path. The endless stream of pedestrians and merchants made Winlear's mouth dry. He could not help but want to jump down and have a good meal. However, Winlear's strange behavior occupied more of his mind. He flew a few times and approached Mary. He could not help but ask softly, "Master, where are we going?" "To the northernmost part of the wizard continent. It's the territory ruled by the northern witches." Mary did not know why, but she was in an unusually good mood today. Not only did she not blame Winlear for talking too much, but she also patiently answered his question. "Why are we going there? Master, didn't you just return to your family? Does the family allow you to run around as you please?" Winlear gathered his courage and asked. I just helped them fight a planar war. After returning, I have a 10-year vacation. From now on, I'm completely free." "Then why are we going to the Northern Witches' territory?" "To see a friend," Mary suddenly said with hatred. "To see a self-righteous friend." After saying that, Mary did not allow him to ask any more questions. She flapped her bat wings, and her figure became faster and faster. Like lightning, she left a red line in the air and disappeared from Winlear's sight. "Master, wait for me." Winlear rolled his eyes and understood that his master did not want him to ask about the mysterious man. Thus, he could only shut his mouth, clenched his teeth, and flapped his wings to catch up with his master. Chapter 459. Inside the stone tower, Grimm was silently studying a black ball. This was a strange item that had been left behind along with Mary's letter. After studying it for a long time, Grimm still couldn't figure out what it was. Beep. In-depth scan completed. Statistical report generated. A moment later, a stream of data flowed into Grimm's mind, displaying a scanned image of the black ball structure. Looking at the familiar image, Grimm couldn't help but cry out, "Carrion Worm Queen." Yes, the black ball in front of him was not an object, but a living creature. It was a strange creature that had left a deep impression on Grimm, the carrion worm queen. Entek's innate talent was very ordinary. With such innate attributes, it was almost impossible for him to advance to become a magus. However, his luck was not bad, and he actually managed to fuse with a carrion worm queen while he was still an acolyte. It was this unexpected gain that allowed him to break through the limits of his innate talent and successfully cross the threshold of becoming a magus. Seriously speaking, even among the ranks of official magi, Entek was one of the top existences. As long as he was able to gather an army of carrion worms, even veteran magi would have to flee in panic when they encountered him. After all, not every magus could gather an army of over 1,000 people like Mary could, and it was also impossible for them to charge through the dense swarm of worms to directly behead him. The combination of a swarm of carrion worms and an undying worm body was truly invincible at times. But now, the carrion worm queen that Entek had fused with had fallen into his hands. One could only imagine the fate of the evil worms. In the Plain of Nights, Mary had actually killed the evil worm Entek all by herself without his help. Just thinking about the hardships and dangers she had gone through, Grimm felt a lingering fear. However, since Mary had left the Worm Queen behind, it was obviously a hint to Grimm that he could do whatever he wanted with it. However, just as Grimm stared at the black ball with killing intent filling his heart, the black ball suddenly trembled and slowly cracked open. It was not a black ball to begin with, but a ball formed by the Worm Queen's curled-up body. The exposed black shell was just the hard carapace on the Worm Queen's back. Perhaps sensing Grimm's killing intent, or perhaps knowing that it could no longer hide, the mutated insect queen automatically stretched its body and turned back into a black beetle. It was a strange creature with a dark black carapace. On its head was a pair of huge colorful eyes, and around the eyes were many small compound eyes. At the very front of the insect's head was a lotus petal-like mouthpart, and a pair of strange blade-like jaws could be clearly seen. On the back of the beetle was a layer of deep black carapace that sparkled with a translucent luster. The AI chip's analysis showed that its hardness was no less than that of a magic iron alloy. With such hardness, even a berserker swordsman would not be able to damage it in the slightest. Only those heavy weapons might be able to injure the soft internal organs inside the carapace through the intense shock, if it had any. Although the sides of the beetle's body were densely packed with many sickle-like appendages, with its fist-sized body, it would be very difficult to rely on them to protect itself. As Grimm silently sized up the strange insect queen, the mutated insect queen also raised its head and emitted a sharp hiss at Grimm. Beep. Strange creature's spiritual force connection has been detected. Requesting host's instructions to initiate the connection? Connect. In the next second, Grimm's mind was occupied by the noise of the strange insect's hissing. The intonation of the insect's hissing constantly changed and adjusted. Finally, a clear stream of consciousness gently touched Grimm's consciousness, and at the same time, a set of difficult-to-understand spiritual projection was transmitted. Protection, contract, survival. The insect queen was not human, so its way of thinking and speech was very different from humans. However, through some special words they could barely communicate a little. You want to use the method of exchanging a contract to obtain my protection? Grimm could only use the AI chip's translation to guess the meaning of the other party's words. This time, the insect queen nodded repeatedly. It's a pity. I care a lot about my human bloodline, so I won't try to fuse with some strange foreign bloodline. Once he thought of Entek's original form, Grimm felt a sense of disgust. As if frightened by Grimm's nonchalant attitude, the insect queen's ugly, lotus petal-shaped mouth wriggled even faster, and the ear-piercing hissing of the insect was a kind of noise. Although the insect queen hissed like a torrential storm, Grimm could only understand the words powerful and obedient through the AI chip. I only accept slaves that are useful to me, like you. Grim lightly tapped the table with his hand, his face full of disdain for the other party. Mature carrion beetles were a type of magical creature that lived in group. They had tough shells and thick hides, and were extremely resistant to attack. More importantly, they could fly, and with a little modification, they would make a good magus slave. However, their biggest weakness was their slow flying speed, and they lacked mid-range and long-range skills. This made it very easy for them to fall into awkward situations where their opponents could not kill them, and they could not catch up to their enemies. The insect queen began to hiss even more crazily, as if it was eager to sell itself. Grim listened attentively for a while, then closed his eyes to think for a while before speaking. I don't care for Intech's inferior undying beetle body, so I won't consider fusing with you. However, I can give you a few suggestions. If you can fuse with one of my subordinates, then I can let you live. Otherwise, I'll definitely erase the last trace of Intech in this world. The insect queen hissed for a long time, but finally lowered its head helplessly. Since you've agreed, then lower your spiritual defenses. I'll leave you with a soul contract. Grim immediately struck while the iron was hot, trying to settle this potential stock in the shortest amount of time possible. Although the insect queen was an intelligent magical creature, it could only allow itself to be trampled on by Grim in this situation. It crawled on the table, and slowly lowered its spiritual defenses. Under the AI chip's control, Grim's spiritual force ruthlessly pierced into the core of the insect queen's consciousness like a burning red needle, branding it with his own soul imprint. This way, the insect queen could be considered as Grim's witchcraft slave. Even if it fused with any person or creature in the future, this soul imprint would exist forever, and would become a necessary method to control its life and death. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the AI chip scanned the insect queen's consciousness and soul, and projected the insect queen's basic data into Grim's mind. Insect Queen, a mutated fusion magical creature. It does not have any offensive abilities, but it can bestow special battle insects to its host. The characteristics of the hatched beetles are determined by the host's innate talent, but their basic form is still that of a beetle. Stats: Strength 1, Agility 1, Vitality 3, Spiritual Force 2. Number of battle insects hatched, determined by spiritual force. Every point of spiritual force can control 20 battle insects. Current limit of control is 40. Speed of incubating battle insects. With sufficient nourishment from flesh and blood, 5 eggs can be incubated every day. Adult growth time, 12 days. Grim slowly analyzed the insect queen's characteristics, silently estimating its basic combat strength. The insect queen did not have any combat strength, so it could only rely on the battle insects it hatched to protect itself. With its incubation speed, as long as it was provided with enough flesh and blood, the stronger the creature, the better. Grim would be able to obtain 5 special Magus rank beetles every day after 12 days. He could then use them as some kind of consumable and continuously send them into the battlefield. From a certain point of view, this insect queen could be used as a mobile beetle nest that could provide Grim's camp with an endless supply of beginner soldiers. However, the insect queen could not do all this by itself. It would need to fuse with a person or creature to obtain this kind of magical ability. Therefore, after subduing the insect queen, choosing a suitable host for it became a key issue. According to Grim's examination, although the insect queen was greatly weakened due to Intech's death, it still retained the basic abilities of a beginner magus. This also meant that any apprentice that fused with the insect queen would become a new evil insect in a very short period of time, as long as they were nurtured properly. Moreover, due to the mark in the insect queen's soul, Grim had a certain degree of control over the new evil insect. Therefore, Grim gave up his authority over the stone tower and allowed the insect queen to secretly contact all the apprentices in the stone tower. He then selected a list of individuals that could fuse with it. To be honest, before seeing the list, Grimm thought that all the apprentices would be on the list. However, when the Insect Queen's list was released, even he was a little surprised. This list of names was too few. At the moment, there were more than 20 sorcerer apprentices living in the stone tower, including prospective sorcerer apprentices like Sabrina and Moss. However, the Insect Queen's list only had 3 names. There was not a single prospective wizard, and none of Grimm's 4 apprentices were on the list. Among the 3 names, there was only one that Grimm could recognize: Bliss. Beginner Apprentice Bliss. Grimm could not understand this result no matter how hard he thought about it. He only understood after communicating with the Insect Queen. It turned out that the Insect Queen's choice of host was not entirely based on the person's strength, but more on the person's talent. The Insect Queen was a magical creature with a dark attribute, so it especially favored creatures with talents similar to itself. Although Blitz was the weakest among them, he was extremely compatible with the Insect Queen in terms of talent attribute. In some aspects, his soul compatibility with the Insect Queen was even greater than that of the evil insect in Tick. Bliss. Grimm repeated this name and could not help but squint his eyes. Chapter 460. 3 days later. Someone from the Anu family, whom Grimm had been waiting for, finally came. Early in the morning, Grimm opened his eyes and found that there was another person in his room. A blurry figure stood silently in the shadows of the corner of the room. Even though the sky was bright and the bright sunlight shone through the narrow window, most of the room was illuminated with a golden hue. However, the place where the figure stood was still dark and deep, as if a passage to the shadow world had been opened in the darkness. Grimm was startled and closed his eyes to sense the surroundings. Regardless of whether it was his spiritual sense, the AI chip's energy probe, or the defensive system of the stone tower, none of them could detect any abnormalities. The only difference was that the shadow energy was slightly more active at the spot where the blurry figure was standing. However, this active was only relative. After all, the entire Magus world was in a state where elemental energy was relatively abundant. Due to the uneven distribution of elemental energy in the geographical environment, there would always be a deposit of elemental energy in certain places. This was a common phenomenon in the Magus world. Grimm, who was used to it, would not be able to distinguish the figure from the background with his spiritual perception if he closed his eyes. Grimm took a deep breath and got up from his bed. He gazed deeply at the blurry figure and bowed. "It's my honor to be able to meet you. Welcome, Lord Colin. At first, I was wondering why Flender failed, but after seeing you, I suddenly understood everything." A cold voice came from the blurry shadow, and it was hard to tell if it was a man or a woman. "Your body hasn't finished tempering, but you've already started tempering your spirit. Hee little guy, if I were you, I'd slow down first and fill up the emptiness in my body first." Grimm listened quietly. Although he did not know why the other party suddenly reminded him, he knew that everything the other party said was beneficial to him. Ever since Grimm completed his body of flames and advanced to become a magus, his potential had increased by leaps and bounds compared to when he was an acolyte. But the pool was big, and he did not have enough time to fill it up. With his current strength as a veteran magus, all of his attributes should not be lower than 5 points. As long as he was willing to spend some magical crystals and find some suitable body tempering methods, he could definitely double his strength, agility, and physique in 20 to 30 years. However, it was a pity that he lacked the necessary accumulation due to his frequent running around. Although his spirit attribute had risen to 7 points, the other attributes of his body had severely hindered his progress. Although he had used a good method to cover up this situation, the internal weakness had become his biggest worry. Although he had just crushed the 2 Anu family magi in a glorious manner, that was largely due to the Wind Dragon's strength. With the Wind Dragon around, his opponents would not be able to attack him unscrupulously, and he would be able to fully display his advantages and control the development of the battle as he pleased. Without the Wind Dragon, Grim could only forcefully change his body a second time to fight against that Magus Flender. Once the transformation ended, he would only be left to be trampled on. According to the AI chip's estimation, the dragon crystal that Alice had given to Grim was worth at least 300,000 magic crystals. After it was turned into a wind dragon puppet, its basic value had reached a ridiculous 500,000 magic crystals. Therefore, Flender and Magus Sicker's defeat was not a loss at all. They had been crushed by 500,000 magic crystals. Lord Colin, the purpose of your visit this time. Facing a rank 2 Shadow Magus from the Anu family, Grim would be bragging if he said he was not nervous. After all, with the power that the other party had displayed, it was very likely that he could be killed in one hit. Although the stone tower was his territory, Grim had not yet locked onto the other party's position with his spiritual force. Even this blurry shadow in front of him could not be sure if it was the original body of Magus Colin. This meant that once both sides started fighting, Grim could only rely on his instincts to attack. One could only imagine the effect of this attack. Our Anu family and your Sarubo family have reached a preliminary agreement. The war will not continue otherwise. The Magus in the shadow let out a cold laugh, causing Grim's heart to tremble. I've already taken those 2 fellows away. This is your compensation. A black shadow shot out in front of Grim and suddenly turned into a black fog. When the fog slowly dispersed, a gray bag appeared in Grim's hand. It was heavy and seemed to be filled with many things. Grim's heart trembled. If the black line had not stopped and had hit him instead, he would not have had time to react and would have been killed in an instant. There was no doubt that the opponent's move carried a hint of deterrence. When Grim's attention shifted away from the gray bag, he realized that the blurry figure had already disappeared. The light in the room had also become brighter. Gilness City. In an ordinary house 3 miles away from the stone tower, all the doors and windows of the house were covered with thick black cloth. The inside of the house was filled with a shadow substance that was almost solid. In the middle of the house there was a small rune circle. A strange Magus wearing a black robe was silently sitting inside. Suddenly, a black light flashed in the rune circle, and the shadow substance that was like a mountain entering the sea began to move slowly. A moment later, the thick shadow substance gathered in 2 places and condensed into 2 blurry human figures. With the continuous injection of the shadow substance, the 2 human figures gradually became more solid. They had already turned from incorporeal to something that could be touched. Finally, after the excess shadow substance exploded, 2 real magi with flesh and blood appeared there. Sicker and Flander were locked in the stone tower with a bitter expression a moment ago. Who knew that in the next moment they would suddenly be in a daze, and they would suddenly appear in a dark space where they could not even see their own fingers in front of them. The 2 were shocked at first, but when they turned their heads and saw the black-robed Magus sitting in the rune circle, they immediately understood what had happened and hurriedly bowed to him. After more than 10 days of recuperation, Sicker's damaged body had more or less recovered. However, the regenerated flesh was obviously not as strong as the previous body tempering. Hence, his entire person seemed a little weak. "Greetings, Lord Colin." Lord Colin. The 2's dull and lifeless eyes suddenly shone with hope, and they bowed to each other with faces full of surprise. "Your performance this time was not good. You've completely lost the face of the family." The black-robed Magus's face was shrouded in a blurry shadow, and even his voice sounded illusory. "When you return, you'll be punished." The 2's faces instantly turned deathly pale. "I wonder how the family plans to deal with this matter?" Flander asked hesitantly. "Why? Do you plan to let 2 mid-tier families really fight?" The black-robed Magus's cold voice came from the shadow. "If you had performed better this time, the family would have had some advantage in the negotiations with the other party. Now, you've destroyed the other party's resource point, and even the two of you have become the other party's captives. In order to settle this matter, the family has lost a lot of resources. The two had been locked up in the stone tower for so long, and they could roughly guess some of the family's reactions. However, when they really heard the news, the resentment and depression in their hearts were still so strong. Lord Colin, is the family not going to hunt down that quasi-sorcerer Sack anymore? Flander could not help but ask in a low voice. The order to hunt him down is still in effect, but it can no longer be carried out in the family's name. That guy called Sack must die. Unless he never leaves Ferdinand City for the rest of his life, otherwise. The voice in the shadow was cold, as if it had been squeezed out from between the gaps of his teeth, making one's heart turn cold after hearing it. Then, what about that fire demon? The one who asked this time was sicker. He had suffered the most damage this time, so the hatred he had suppressed in his heart was driving him crazy. A fight between magi is unavoidable. If the two of you want to regain your dignity, the family will naturally support you. However, this can only be carried out in private. You should think carefully. If you fail again, the other party will have enough of an excuse to kill you. Hearing the black-robed Magus's words, the two's faces turned even paler. That fire demon has a powerful wind dragon puppet, and its strength is no weaker than a peak elite, Sicker said hatefully. In the family, any Tier 1 Magus would not be a match for him in a one-on-one fight, unless, speaking up to this point, Flander could not help but hesitate. Unless Lord Ivan personally takes action. Sicker gritted his teeth and said what Flander found hard to say. Although this wizard Ivan was respectfully addressed as Lord, in reality, he was still a Tier 1 Magus. However, he was already at the peak of Tier 1 Elite Magi, and was currently making various preparations to become a Tier 2 Magus. More importantly, Wizard Ivan was the direct disciple of this Tier 2 black-robed Magus, Colin. The two of you can stop dreaming. The dark and cold spiritual force of the Magus in black robes surged slightly, making it hard for the two of them to breathe. Ivan has already been transferred to the family's secondary plane last month. There, he will be able to break through to Grade 2 without any interference. So, you have to regain your lost dignity by yourselves. Don't even think of borrowing the family's strength. This time, even I have been specifically warned by the family leader not to cross ranks and attack. Otherwise, it will attract a strong backlash from the other party's family. Regarding this point, Sicker and Flander had long since understood it in their hearts. This was actually an unwritten rule of the various large Magus organizations. No high-ranked Magus could wantonly kill low-ranked Magi. Of course, there were exceptions when low-ranked Magi took the initiative to offend. The reason for this rule was to maintain the order of the entire Magus world. Otherwise, without the restrictions of the rules, any high-ranked Magus from any two Magus families would have the terrifying strength to kill all the low-ranked Magi and the mortals in the other party's territory. If they went all out and slaughtered, it was estimated that apart from a few scattered high-ranked Magi, the remaining strength of the two opposing families would be wiped out cleanly. Hence, under normal circumstances, high-ranked Magi would not easily interfere in a battle between low-ranked Magi. Otherwise, the other party could use this as an excuse to kill their own low-ranked Magi. Chapter 461. The Third Floor of the Stone Tower. After Grimm finished his daily meditation, he slowly walked to a secret room. Inside the secret room, the beginner acolyte Bliss was sitting cross-legged in a large wooden barrel. His expression was twisted and sinister, as if he was silently enduring some great pain. The barrel was filled with a purplish-black liquid that emitted a pungent smell. Seeing Grimm enter, Bliss struggled to get up and salute, but was stopped. "How is it? Is the fusion going smoothly?" Grimm asked with concern. "Everything is going smoothly, my lord." Bliss endured the pain and replied with difficulty, "I will definitely succeed." With that, he gently lifted the robe that was draped over his body, revealing his bony chest and the wriggling sarcoma. As a wandering acolyte, although Bliss's body could not be said to be sturdy, he was not weak either. However, in just 2 to 3 days, he had lost 30 to 40 kilograms, looking like a lamp that had run out of oil. And the culprit that caused him to be in such a miserable state was that terrifying tumor parasitic on his chest. At this moment, a tumor the size of a fist hung from Bliss's chest. Through the translucent skin, one could vaguely see a strange insect wriggling inside. Its head had already pierced deep into Bliss's flesh, leaving only a small part of its body and its abdominal sac outside. As the insect approached his heart, the pain Bliss felt became more and more intense. Grimm bent over to check the progress of the fusion. He stood up straight and warned Bliss with a solemn expression. The mutated insect queen has already come into contact with your heart. Next, it will try to parasitize your heart and try its best to fuse with your heart. So, I'll ask you one last time. Do you regret this? If you do, I can still interrupt this process. Otherwise, once you pass this stage, your body will show obvious signs of insect transformation in a short period of time. When that happens, even I will be powerless. Without my Lord's guidance, I know that with my talent, I will never be able to become a true magus. So, I do not regret this choice. Just as Bliss finished speaking, he felt a piercing pain in his chest. He could not help but grab the edge of the barrel with both hands, raising his head and letting out a pained howl. Before he could even scream, a large amount of blood spurted out of Bliss's mouth like a fountain. From the way he was vomiting blood, his internal organs must have suffered serious damage. The moment the bright red blood came into contact with the purplish-black liquid, it was immediately absorbed and passed through Bliss's skin to replenish his body. During this process, the purplish-black liquid gradually boiled, and a strange fragrance began to spread throughout the secret room. During this process, the purplish-black liquid gradually boiled, and a strange fragrance began to spread throughout the secret room. This song was like the sound of nature. Sometimes it was fresh and sweet, sometimes it was resounding and shocking, sometimes it was like an orchid in a valley, sometimes it was quiet and deep. In the song, a few beautiful female sirens the size of a palm were bobbing up and down on the purple-black liquid, singing together. However, as their singing drifted in the air, the flesh and blood of the beautiful sirens suddenly rotted and collapsed, turning into puddles of purplish-black pus that flowed into the wooden barrel. At the same time, the melodious and beautiful voice turned into a vicious curse of blood and tears. Waves of spiritual force filled with intense resentment and enmity rippled in the air, then surged into Bliss's body. At the same time, the melodious voice turned into a malicious curse of blood and tears. Spiritual undulations filled with intense resentment and enmity rippled in the air and surged into Blitz's body. Inside his body, that damned insect queen was frantically devouring his heart. Outside his body, the strange siren's curse surged in unceasingly, continuously eroding his soul. Inside his body, that damned insect queen was frantically devouring his heart. Outside his body, the strange siren's curse surged in unceasingly, continuously eroding his soul. When the pain reached its peak, Bliss suddenly sank into the purplish-black liquid, suppressing the disgust in his heart as he gulped down mouthfuls of it. The liquid in the wooden barrel was the blood of the sirens. Looking at the volume of the barrel, one would need to suck out the blood of 10 sirens to gather such a large amount. Sirens were a type of marine magical creature that could be compared to human magi. Grimm had spent 150,000 magic crystals on 10 sirens with the strength of high-grade acolytes. The fusion between Bliss and the mutant insect queen was actually a process of devouring each other. During this process, the insect queen's body would become Bliss's new heart core after the fusion, while the insect queen's soul would live in Bliss's soul. The mutant insect queen itself no longer had the space to grow, but by living in Bliss's body, it could grow stronger together with Bliss. This was a unique way for their race to grow. However, because the fusion process was too cruel and bloody, if the host could not endure it, both the human and the insect would die. Hence, in order to increase the success rate of the fusion, Grimm could only purchase the siren's blood at a high price. Just like the elves' water of life, the siren's blood also had an astonishing regenerative ability. However, the blood was already soaked with the hatred and curses of the sirens before they died, so using the siren's blood would require one to bear the power of the curse. The main reason why Grimm chose the siren's blood instead of the water of life was that the insect queen and Bliss both had unique dark and earth attributes, which had serious conflicts with the water of life. Hence, Grimm had no choice but to choose the siren's blood even if there were serious repercussions. Fortunately, as long as Bliss could successfully fuse with the siren's blood, it would be easy to remove the curse. The intense pain of both his body and soul tortured Bliss to the point where he wanted to die. He curled up into a ball and soaked in the siren's blood, silently enduring the terrifying pain of the insect queen devouring his heart. Bright red blood spurted out from his nose and mouth, mixed with the siren's blood, and was absorbed into his body through his skin. With this life cycle, Bliss would not die during the fusion due to the exhaustion of his life force. Throughout the entire process, Grimm stood silently at the edge of the barrel, carefully observing every step of the fusion process. Relying on the subtle connection between their souls and the AI chip's full-frequency vision, Bliss's body was like a transparent skin bag, unable to obstruct Grimm's vision at all. Not only did Grimm observe carefully, he even took out some blood samples from the barrel from time to time and stored them away. Afterwards, he could compare the changes in Bliss's blood composition to understand the deeper mysteries of the insect queen's fusion. While Grimm waited anxiously, the mutated insect queen had already drilled its entire body into Bliss's chest and successfully devoured his heart. Under normal circumstances, Bliss would have been a dead man by now. After all, with the strength of a junior acolyte, it was impossible for him to use magic to support the life cycle in his body. However, the existence of the siren's blood gave Bliss an extra life force, allowing him to survive until the mutated insect queen transformed into a new core to replace his heart even though his heart was missing. Splash! Water splashed everywhere. Bliss suddenly drilled out of the siren's blood, his hands grabbing the edge of the barrel as he panted heavily. In his wide open eyes, a pair of strange yellow vertical pupils could be seen. 3 days later, Sabrina carried a large plate of lamb ribs that still had traces of blood on it into the secret room. This was the second floor of the stone tower. Apart from a few quasi-magi, normal acolytes were not allowed to set foot on the second floor. However, Bliss, who only had the strength of a beginner apprentice, not only had his own residence here, but he also enjoyed the privilege of having Sabrina personally bring him 5 meals a day. Such preferential treatment undoubtedly made the other acolytes go crazy with jealousy. However, only Sabrina knew that it was very difficult to tell if this guy who locked himself in the secret room was still the same junior acolyte Bliss. Ever since Lord Grimm had ordered him to move from the first floor of the stone tower to the second floor, Bliss had never left the tower again. He always hid in the dark, airtight secret room and spent most of his time feasting crazily all day long. At first, he still ate those delicately grilled steaks with a thick layer of bright grease on them. However, even the 2 chefs sent by the city lord could not keep up with Bliss's horrifying, bottomless stomach. Sabrina watched as his 3 meals a day turned into 5 meals a day, and then into continuous eating and drinking. She was like a busy porter, shuttling back and forth between the secret room and the kitchen with a large plate of food. Later, Sabrina realized that Bliss did not seem to be picky about whether the food was cooked or not, so she made the decision to let the chef skip the process of frying, and applying sauce. She only needed to cut the lamb into suitable sizes, grill it, and send it in. In the end, Sabrina even used the mechanical claws hidden in her body to grab the bloody half of the cow's carcass and send it into the secret room. Finally, Grim could not stand it anymore. He called Sabrina over and said a few words. Thus, as a mechanical girl, Sabrina sent a live cow into Bliss's secret room. It was unknown if it was intentional or not, but most of the sorcerer apprentices in the stone tower had been sent out. Thus, 4 to 5 shiny silver mechanical tentacles extended from the side of Sabrina's waist. She lifted a 300-kilogram bull and walked into Blitz's secret chamber with ease. The secret room was dark and devoid of light. With Sabrina's powerful mechanical eyes, which naturally had infrared and low-light vision, she should have been able to see through the small secret room. However, it was rather strange. The darkness in the secret room seemed to be mixed with some kind of witchcraft effect. No matter how hard she tried, she could not see through it. She could only vaguely feel that there was a terrifying secret hidden in the darkness. Standing at the door, she did not dare to take another step forward. Instead, she used the mechanical tentacles to carry the struggling bull into the darkness. Every time she did this, she would feel a strong pulling force from the mechanical tentacles. If she did not let go of the bull in time, she was afraid that she would have been pulled into the darkness of the secret room. When she retracted the mechanical tentacles, the bull had disappeared without a trace. The end of the tentacles was stained with some green, pungent mucus. Chapter 462. Deep into the night. The bustling Gilness city had once again returned to its usual tranquility. The famished Bliss wandered around the stone tower, searching for his prey. The black robe on his body bulged, as if there were many living creatures digging under it. Strange cracking sounds could be heard from time to time. This was the second level of the stone tower. Other than Sabrina and Moss, there was no one else here. Thus, Bliss did not find a suitable target even after walking around the corridor again and again. At this moment, in Bliss's strange compound eyes, dozens of scenes from different regions were flashing before his eyes. He who had mastered the bug's eye for the first time was getting dizzy. Without a sound, Bliss stopped somewhere in the corridor. He silently sensed what was going on behind a thick stone door. Under his black robe, 4 to 5 strange insects with dark shells rolled out with a wave of squirming. They were only the size of a fingernail, but they crawled agilely on the ground, then crawled into the small gap under the stone door. As soon as they crawled into the stone door, Bliss's dense compound eyes immediately used their vision to see what was going on inside. The stone door was brightly lit. Sabrina, the quasi-sorcerer, was lying on a wooden table, carefully polishing a sharp cross-shaped spiral blade. As a mechanical girl, these cross-shaped blades were one of the few long-range attacks she had. Thus, she had to take them out and maintain them every once in a while. Just as she was concentrating on her work, an indescribable sense of danger suddenly crept into her heart. Sabrina suddenly turned around. The red mechanical eyes under the half-silver mask quickly scanned the entire room, but did not find anything out of the ordinary. Be it the infrared sensor of her left eye or the low-light vision of her right eye, they did not capture any unusual creatures, except for a few small insects slowly crawling in the shadows at the corner of the wall. Small insects? Sabrina's mechanical eyes flashed fiercely. Even though this place could not compare to the regular wizard's pagoda, it still had a set of tight defense spell formation. How could she let some small insects enter her room? Understanding this, Sabrina's girl-like body suddenly split open a few long and narrow cracks, and 3 cross-shaped spinning blades shot out. They streaked across the shadows in the corner of the wall as fast as lightning. Those weird little bugs were obviously no match for the cross-spinning blades that were enchanted with piercing and sharpening effects. In Sabrina's infrared perception, the 5 red dots were instantly extinguished. Just as the insects were killed, a faint groan came from outside the stone door. Without hesitation, Sabrina opened the stone door and rushed out with her silver-white mechanical tentacles waving around her. She held an instant-cast magic wand in each hand. However, under the soft illumination of the crystal, not a single figure could be seen in the long and narrow corridor. The enemy ran so fast. Sabrina's eyes flashed. She planned to send a witchcraft message to Grimm on the 3rd floor of the stone tower. However, as soon as the light of witchcraft information gathered around her mouth, Sabrina's heart skipped a beat. She turned her hand and took the cross-shaped blade that killed the alien insect. Its surface was stained with a bit of stinky mucus. Under the light of the lamp, it emitted a strange green luster. Could it be him? Sabrina hesitated for a moment, then waved her hand to disperse the light. She turned around and returned to the room. After closing the stone door, there was no more movement. At the end of the corridor, near the corner of the ceiling, where the illumination of the crystal could not reach, was currently filled with strange black beetles. When the corridor regained its silence, the black beetles surged out like a tide and crawled along the wall to the floor. There, they once again formed a strange human figure wearing a black robe. Insect eye, insect swarm incarnation, shadow traversal, earth spear thrust. These were the various strange abilities that Bliss had obtained after fusing with the mutant insect queen. However, because his spiritual force was too weak, he could not support a large swarm of insects. Thus, he could only send out 12 beetle scouts. Bliss's spiritual force was still at the level of a beginner apprentice, but his combat ability had improved. He was no longer the little apprentice that could be easily bullied. Lord Grimm had said that the insect queen he fused with used to belong to the demonic insect in Tick, and in Tick was a powerful magus. This meant that the path to becoming a magus had long been opened. Now, he only needed to focus on training his spiritual force, and he would be able to steadily enter the rank of a magus. Although he was still a beginner apprentice, the speed at which he advanced to become a magus was destined to be tens or even hundreds of times faster than other acolytes. In the future, he was destined to become a powerful bloodline magus. Under the motivation of this powerful conviction, Bliss's heart surged. He almost could not control his restless emotions and wanted to rush to the 1st floor of the stone tower to start a massacre. Flesh, he needed flesh. For some reason, after successfully fusing with the insect queen, his thirst for flesh and blood had never disappeared. If not for Lord Grimm's strict warning that he was not allowed to hunt within the stone tower, the few acolytes on the 1st floor, as well as the many maids and odd job workers, would have long become his prey. Bliss stood up and looked at the stone door at the end of the corridor, then turned around and disappeared into the darkness around the corner. With his current strength, he was still not a match for these quasi-sorcerers. He did not even have the ability to get close to them. Therefore, if he wanted to keep his secret, he could only lower his stance and target those below the rank of high-rank acolyte. After taking 2 steps in the dimly lit corridor, Blitz abruptly halted his step. The master seemed to have emphasized that he was not allowed to hunt within the stone tower, but did not mention anything about outside the tower. If he were to sneak out of the stone tower under the cover of night, no one would care about the tens of thousands of people in Gilness City going missing. Under normal circumstances, this kind of senseless slaughter would definitely arouse the good in Bliss's heart. But at this moment, his stomach was rumbling with hunger, and his mind was already muddled by the flames of hunger. He no longer had the time to care about the various feelings in his heart. Instead, he succumbed to his instincts of slaughter and predation, turning around and rushing towards the nearest airtight window. Sensing that Bliss's aura had disappeared from the stone tower, Grimm, who was flipping through a spell book on the 3rd floor of the stone tower, shook his head slightly and sighed inwardly. As a sorcerer stationed in the tower, with his defensive spell formation and powerful spiritual force, nothing that happened in the stone tower could escape his spiritual senses. That was why Grimm was aware of Bliss's actions, even adding fuel to the fire and allowing him to do as he pleased. Without Grimm's permission, it would have been impossible for Bliss to escape the Bluestone Tower with his weak attack power. he casually threw out a magic puppet crystal core and summoned a wind breath monster, letting it hover in the air and follow Bliss. With this spy in the sky, Bliss's every move in Gilneas City was under his control. Grimm had a good impression of Bliss, a beginner acolyte. Loyal, hard-working, and a little kind-hearted, he was a decent acolyte. His only regret was that his elemental affinity was not too obvious, causing his innate talent to be low. He had been stuck at the beginner acolyte level for a long time, unable to advance. However, after successfully fusing with the Insect Queen, his dual elemental attributes of darkness and earth had been activated, becoming more obvious than his other attribute. This would obviously affect the development of his bloodline in the future. Furthermore, after two creatures with different natures fused together, how would their nature develop? This was a question worth investigating and exploring. Hence, after the AI chip established the relevant research subjects, Grimm worked hard to gather the necessary research materials from various angles. In any case, with Grimm's methods, it was as easy as flipping his hand to gather basic information and habits from Bliss's senses. The only thing he had to be careful of was not to let Bliss blow things up. If news spread, even if Grimm could calm things down with the help of Lord Arwa, it would still attract unnecessary trouble. Bliss was different from Meryl. Like the blazing flame monarch's Gargamel, Bliss was a subordinate that Grimm had secretly created for his future development. If he could avoid exposing himself, Grimm did not wish for him to appear too early in the eyes of people with ulterior motives. After settling Bliss's matters, Grimm took out a knowledge crystal from his waist pouch and tossed it in his hand, sinking into deep thought. This knowledge crystal came from the storage space of the Flemish wizard. Inside it was a messy record of a lot of fragmented witchcraft knowledge. It was obvious that these were incomplete knowledge that Flender had obtained by chance during his long life as a magus. To prevent himself from forgetting important things, he had recorded them all in the knowledge crystal. Some time ago, the AI chip had used space and time to tidy up the fragmented knowledge. After filtering out 87% of the useless knowledge and the information that it had already collected, the remaining 13% had greatly expanded Grimm's knowledge base. From this 13% of incomplete knowledge, Grimm had unexpectedly obtained an important piece of information. Soul equipment could also continue to evolve. Grimm also had the Soul Armament, which was the book he had obtained from the Flower Demon's lair. Ever since he had obtained it, it had always been by Grimm's side, and had helped him greatly in countless battles. Firstly, the characteristics of soul equipment was something that Grimm should research. It was a pity that he had too little knowledge and information, and even if he wanted to research it, he did not know where to start. Hence, Grimm had always treated the secret voodoo scroll as a high-grade spellbook that could store 6 instant-cast spells. He had never thought of exploring its deeper applications. However, Grimm had unexpectedly obtained this strange piece of information from Flender's knowledge crystal. If the secret voodoo scroll could become even more powerful. Chapter 463. Gilneas City, which had been in turmoil for a long time, finally quietened down. The original Level 2 resource point had been through this catastrophe, and was now in a dilapidated state. If they wanted to restore it, they would first have to repair the damage caused by the battle between the three magi. If they had the manpower and resources, they might as well rebuild another resource point. Hence, after receiving compensation from the Anu family, the Sarubo family gave up on the resource point. They only repaired the Iron Ring mining ground and resumed operations. Hence, the acolytes stationed at the resource point were transferred to the Iron Ring mining ground, and some were stationed in Gilneas City. The rest returned to their families. With the Anu family retreating from the vicinity of Gilneas City, the battle between the Sarubo family and the Anu family came to an end with one side losing face. Although everyone knew that the matter was not over, on the surface, the two middle-ranked families still restrained themselves and did not let the battle escalate into a family war. The instigator of this conflict, the Quasi-Magus Sark, who had killed the acolytes of the Anu family, hid in Ferdinand's city and temporarily kept his life. The name of the fire demon was once again resounding. He had single-handedly defeated two Anu family magi and held them hostage. Such an absurd thing was rarely seen in the history of wars in the Scattered Towers forest. Hence, Grimm's nickname of the Fire Demon was once again mentioned and gradually known by all the Magus families. The Cerubo family had a rather deep background, and now they had a powerful fighter like Grimm. In a short period of time, many Magus families and organizations in the central continent were increasingly optimistic about the future of the Cerubo family. Almost all of these disturbances had nothing to do with Grimm, who was hiding in the limestone tower and refusing to come out. After the dust settled, there was an endless stream of magi who came to visit Grimm in Gilness City. Some of them came to congratulate Grimm, some of them happened to pass by, and some of them came to invite him to go on an adventure. Of course, most of them came to buy some top-grade magic puppets, yes. As the process of the previous battle became known, the elemental puppet, which played a pivotal role in Grimm's battle, became the focus of everyone's attention. Looking through Grimm's history of battle, regardless of whether it was the Lord of the Flames, the Inferno Tyrant, or the Wind Dragon, the powerful elemental puppets had become Grimm's greatest guarantee to turn the tables on him. This also meant that Grimm himself was a puppet maker who was not known to the outside world. With the same amount of resources consumed, the elemental puppets would not be able to defeat the metal puppets of the same level due to the lack of strong shells. However, the metal war puppet's huge body and terrifying weight made it difficult to carry it around without a magic puppet amulet. Under such circumstances, a high-quality elemental puppet was extremely valuable. This was why many wizards were attracted by Grimm's reputation and were willing to spend large amounts of magic crystals to ask him to create a powerful elemental puppet for them. Due to well-known reasons, everyone also knew that arcane sorcerers had quite a high failure rate when crafting witchcraft items. Hence, every magus who came would prepare 2 to 3 sets of magic materials and high-grade elemental crystal cores in order to obtain a satisfactory magic puppet. At the start, Grimm was extremely against it. Just like what everyone had found out, having a high-quality elemental puppet was undoubtedly the reason why he had been able to survive until now. If his enemies had the same kind of magic puppet, it would be hard to say if he would still be able to gain the upper hand. However, when a rich and overbearing magus placed 3 sets of resources in front of him in exchange for a high-quality elemental puppet, Grimm could no longer resist the thirst in his heart and accepted the other party's conditions. For the next 3 days, the magus stayed in the stone tower and secretly revealed a portion of his strength to Grimm, as well as specific and detailed requirements. Though he could not use the AI chip to examine the other party's body and obtain first-hand information, Grimm was able to get a rough idea of his basic body model and his habits in battle. The preparatory work took 3 days, and the AI chip used these 3 days to successfully complete the calculations and model of the high-grade custom-made magic puppet. The other party provided 3 peak grade 1 wind elemental crystal cores, and Grimm needed to create a high-grade mount that could complement his casting and battle skills. With the help and guidance of the AI chip, Grimm was able to achieve a success rate of 89%, which was much higher than the 64% success rate of a rank 2 magic puppet. Hence, without any surprises, Grimm successfully created a powerful Galehawk for the other party in just 1 try. Of course, the process of creation was not to be seen. Hence, when the other party left satisfied after testing it, Grimm had successfully obtained 2 peak grade 1 wind elemental crystal cores as well as a large number of supplementary materials. In comparison, the magic crystals that the other party had given him seemed insignificant, not even worth mentioning. Having tasted the sweetness of success, Grimm quickly accepted another 3 similar requests. Apart from one where he had some problems and wasted a portion of materials, the rest were all completed in one go. This allowed him to earn a bountiful harvest in an instant. The elemental magic puppets that he had created were all of superior quality. The consumption of magic power was only 70% of other elemental puppets, but their power was increased by more than 30%. However, what the magus who commissioned the request was that the elemental magic puppets that Grimm had personally created only used 50% of the spiritual force of other elemental puppets. This meant that a magus could only control one elemental puppet with the same amount of spiritual force, but could summon 2 elemental puppets at the same time. Isn't this a little too terrifying? In battles between magi, the summoned elemental puppets were mostly used as cannon fodder or to protect themselves. Very few magi used them as a main force in battle. The main reason for this was that the summoned elemental puppets required the magus' spiritual force. A magus only had a limited amount of spiritual force. If too much of it was used by the elemental puppets, the amount of spiritual force left for casting spells would be stretched thin. Take the veteran wizards, for example. Most of them had a mind power of 10 to 15 points. If they wanted to summon an elemental puppet of the same strength, they would need 6 to 7 points of spiritual force. As long as the elemental puppet was alive, this portion of their spiritual force would always be used to support the elemental puppet's battle need. Without this portion of spiritual force, veteran magi's spiritual force would be affected to a certain extent, whether it was their spiritual force recovery or the casting of large-scale spells. Therefore, when the elemental puppets could not reach their desired level of strength, most magi would rather rely on their own spells. However, the magic puppets that Grimm had created, even those grade 1 elites, only required 3 to 4 points of spiritual force to summon. This meant that a veteran magus would only need 6 to 8 points of spiritual force to summon 2 elemental puppets of the same strength. Even if 2 of the 3 magi were a little weaker, they would still be a huge support force. In an extreme case, a veteran magus could give up on the battlefield and summon 4 elemental puppets of similar strength. They could use their unbridled bombardment to force the enemy to retreat. This was much safer than fighting on the battlefield himself. As long as the enemy did not have any dirty tricks or dodged the elemental puppets, this kind of tactic was almost invincible. It was brainless and brutal. Even if you were a genius magus, your casting speed and the power of your spells would be stronger than your opponent's. However, when you were surrounded and attacked by 4 or 5 fearless elemental magic puppets, the continuous attacks and the method of exchanging injury for injury could make a so-called genius wizard retreat and cry bitterly. Therefore, when the information of the magic puppets created by Grimm was leaked, all the magi were moved, and those magi who mainly focused on summoning almost went crazy. As more and more magi gathered in Gilness City, Forgan, a grade 2 magus from the Cerubo family, personally rushed to the stone tower and half persuaded and half forced Grimm and the others to return to Ferdinand City. The excuse he used was also very appropriate. According to the Cerubo family's secret information network, there were already a few grade 2 magi who had their eyes on Grimm. Grimm should not have exposed the wind dragon that was close to the pinnacle of the Type 1 realm in the previous battle. As for the wind dragon, it used a genuine Tier 2 core crystal. This meant that with Grimm's current skill in making magic puppets, he could already design and create a grade 2 crystal core. If the Cerubo family could produce 1 or 2 more magic puppets with the strength of a grade 2 magus, it would be a huge disaster for any enemy family. Even if Grimm could not make a grade 2 magic puppet, the family would still have 20 or 30 more peak grade 1 magic puppets. It would be a bloody massacre. Because of this, the higher-ups of the Cerubo family even alerted the great wizard Cerubo himself, who was in the outer world, and forcefully brought Grimm back to the family's headquarters. When he heard that the family wanted him to help them make a batch of suitable elemental magic puppets, Grimm agreed without hesitation. Therefore, he was brought by Wizard Forgan to a heavily guarded resource warehouse on the 16th floor of the Wizard Tower. After Wizard Forgan used 6 or 7 different spells and went through 16 identity checks, he finally opened the door of the warehouse in front of him. "Work hard, Grimm." Wizard Forgan excitedly spread his arms. "You will become the hero of the family's rise." Chapter 464. Thus, a difficult negotiation began. For a qualified arcane sorcerer, a stable success rate was the most important thing he should consider. After some thought, Grimm reported to Wizard Forgan that the success rate was 17% for Rank 2 elemental crystal cores, and 36% for Rank 1 elemental crystal cores. Due to the unavoidable loss of energy, all elemental magic puppets would drop in rank during the forging process. For example, it would be impressive if Grimm could refine a Tier 2 elemental crystal nucleus to the pinnacle of Tier 1. Even Grimm himself had not reached Rank 2, so he had no idea how powerful a Rank 2 wizard could be. Apart from knowing that a Tier 2 sorcerer's attacks could reach a frightening 200 degrees of damage, nothing else was known about them. Therefore, no matter how talented he was, there was no way he could make a real Rank 2 magic puppet. Of course, Wizard Forgan did not believe Grimm's basic success rate, but he did know a thing or two about puppeteers and puppeteers. A normal arcane wizard could only make a Rank 1 elemental puppet with a 42% success rate, which was not much higher than Grimm's. Grimm's magic puppets, on the other hand, were modified by himself. They consumed less mana, took up less power of the will, and had more power of attack. With these advantages, it was understandable that his success rate was lower than a normal arcane wizard's. Since this Grimm dared to report a 36% success rate for Rank 1 elemental crystal cores, he must be exaggerating a lot. However, with a normal arcane wizard's 42% success rate, even if he lowered the success rate, it would not be too ridiculous. Therefore, before talking to Grimm, Wizard Forgan was already prepared for Grimm to lower the price as much as he could. But now, Grimm's success rate was even above Wizard Forgan's bottom line. Needless to say, Wizard Forgan was very satisfied with Grimm's obedience. As for what Grimm said about not being able to make a Rank 2 magic puppet, Wizard Forgan chose to believe him. After all, Grimm's demon puppet Wind Dragon was only at the peak of Rank 1 with a Rank 2 dragon crystal core. Its strongest attack could barely reach 155 degrees, which was still quite a distance away from the original Flame Tyrant. Of course, this also had to do with the positioning of the two magic puppets. When the Inferno Tyrant was first built, its position was to be an extremely violent flame fortress. In addition, fire element sorcery was already good at attacking, so its highest attack strength could reach around 175 degrees. The Wind Dragon, on the other hand, took into account high speed and maneuverability. Wind element spells were also known for their lightness and speed, so its highest attack could reach 155 degrees. After knowing each other's bottom line, Wizard Forgan and Grimm began to argue about the exchange rate for making magic puppets. According to Wizard Forgan, for every 3 Rank 2 elemental crystal cores provided by the family, Grimm had to provide a Rank 1 elite elemental magic puppet. As for the elemental puppets that were successfully created, the family would buy them back at the price of 20,000 magical crystals each. Grimm, on the other hand, was more inclined to use Class 2 elemental crystal nuclei as payment. He hoped that his family could provide him with 4 Class 2 elemental crystal nuclei at a time, and he would not charge any fees for each successful elemental puppet. Neither side was willing to give in easily on this issue. After all, this concerned the fate of the Grade 2 elemental crystal core. In the Sorcerer Continent, the basic value of a Rank 2 elemental crystal core was more than 50,000 magic crystals. Also, there was no market for them, so it was very difficult to collect them. The Solubo family had only managed to gather so many rank 2 elemental crystal cores in one go because of the 2 secondary planes they had been operating for a long time. If it was any other small family, they might not even be able to gather so many rank 2 elemental crystal cores. After some difficult bargaining, the two sides finally reached a consensus. The Solubo family would provide Grimm with 7 rank 2 elemental crystal cores at a time, and Grimm would have to provide 2 elite magic puppets. The family would not pay for the production of the magic puppet. As for the production time, it would be a year. However, Grimm also mentioned that he needed to return to the Flame Monarch's wizard tower to complete the work. After all, that was his private territory, and there was an underground lava sea suitable for his training and recovery. Regarding this problem, Wizard Forgan reluctantly agreed to it after consulting Mr. Sanazar. However, Wizard Forgan also requested that Grimm not leave the Flame Monarch's wizard tower. If he really needed to go out, he had to ask Wizard Forgan, and he would personally accompany him. This was also for Grimm's safety. After all, an arcane wizard who was so important to the family could easily fall into the enemy family's trap if he went out. If Grimm did not want to die without knowing why, then living in seclusion was the only way for him to protect himself. As for the title of Fire Demon that he had just obtained, it was nothing in the eyes of the rank 2 wizards from the enemy families. In order to increase the power of Grimm's Flame Monarch's wizard tower, Wizard Forgan finally agreed to send Merrill over. This was tantamount to tacitly agreeing that Grimm could officially form his own small circle. This kind of power was something only rank 2 wizards could enjoy in a normal wizard family. Now that Grimm was able to form his own team with the power of a rank 1 wizard, it could be seen as the Solubo family's greatest sincerity. As for why the higher-ups of the Solubo family were so open-minded this time, Grimm secretly guessed that it could be an overt plot by the other party. All this time, Grimm had been walking the path of a fire wizard, working hard to develop in the direction of a battle wizard. However, the situation had changed. Grimm had actually revealed such a powerful arcane wizard talent, which was exactly what the higher-ups of the Solubo family wanted. Creating 2 elemental magic puppets for the family in a year meant that Grimm would spend most of his time in concocting elemental crystal cores and creating elemental magic puppet. Although this could bring him a huge income of magic crystals, and if he was lucky, he might even get a rank 2 elemental crystal core. However, he would have to pay the price of having his strength stagnate for a long time. For someone who aspired to become a battle wizard, this was extremely torturous. At this moment, the benefits Grimm could offer were simply too great. That was why he was so passionate about creating elemental magic puppets. After 3 to 5 years, he would find that although he had gained a lot of resources and magic crystals, he had lost the ambition and fighting spirit he once had. With the Solubo family's resources, they could use this method to keep Grimm in the alchemy laboratory. If 3 to 5 years wasn't enough, then they would spend another 30 to 50 years. On one hand, the family could turn their dead resources into living battle power. On the other hand, they could slowly wear down Grimm's spirit. Therefore, when the Solubo family discovered Grimm's talent, they changed their attitude of desperately trying to suppress him. Instead, they became extremely protective of him. Grimm did not care about the Solubo family's schemes at all. With the help of the AI chip, his success rate in creating elemental magic puppets was not something anyone could imagine. Therefore, trying to use this to keep him in the alchemy laboratory was a big mistake. Instead, it gave him a legitimate chance and time to polish his power of the will. Before they parted, Wizard Forgan gazed at Grimm with a complicated look in his eyes and warned him in a meaningful tone, "I saw something strange on your apprentice. You better be careful. Don't be fooled by the meek appearance of these little guys." Grimm's heart skipped a beat. He knew the change in Blitz's body did not escape Wizard Forgan's senses. He could only nod in acknowledgement. After negotiating with his family and signing a spell contract that would last for 20 years, Grimm used the teleportation formation in the Fedinan City Wizard Tower to return to the Flame Monarch's Wizard Pagoda. Merrill and Blitz accompanied him back. As for Sabrina and the other apprentices, they could only return to the Wizard's Pagoda on their own. The basic cost of this long-distance teleportation was 2,000 magic crystals per person. The three of them added up to 6,000 magic crystals. If it wasn't for the fact that his family had taken care of all the expenses, perhaps Grimm wouldn't have been willing to spend such a large sum of mana crystals just to save 4 days of travel time. This time, it was not that Wizard Forgan had suddenly become generous, but that he could not afford to take the risks along the way. Other than being a powerful battle wizard, the fire demon Grimm was also a brilliant puppet maker. This rumor had already spread throughout most of the central continent. Under these circumstances, allowing Grimm to return to the Flame Monarch's Wizard Pagoda on his own was an unforgivable and dangerous behavior. To avoid any accidents along the way, Wizard Forgan could only nod his head and acquiesce to Grimm's extravagant actions. The dense light of teleportation had just dissipated from the teleportation formation. Grimm shook his slightly dizzy head. When the scene in front of him had stabilized, he saw Gargamel with a wizard's staff in one hand and a wizard's scroll in the other. He even had a small potion bottle in his mouth. Obviously, Grimm did not inform Gargamel about his return. He even used the teleportation formation to return. Therefore, when Gargamel sensed the commotion in the teleportation room of the Wizard's Pagoda, he immediately rushed over with the forest demon. The skinny Gargamel, with a protruding mouth and cheeks like a monkey, stared at the three people who had teleported over with a vigilant expression. When he saw the familiar tall figure of Grimm, he let out a sigh of relief. He hurriedly put away all his equipment and waved his hand to summon the forest demon hiding in the dark to greet his master. Chapter 465. The meeting in the teleportation room was rather awkward. Lin Yao seemed to be overly sensitive, showing hostility towards Bliss, who was shrouded in a black robe. If not for Grimm and Gargamel being present, she might have lost control of her impulsive nature and attacked Bliss. Even with Grimm's endorsement, Lin Yao's attitude towards Bliss was still terrible, as if she did not want to get close to him. Bliss, who was hiding under the thick black robe, smiled coldly at Lin Yao's reaction. The eerie green eyes under the shadow of the drooping hood made one shudder. In comparison, while Merrill and Gargamel had also sensed the potential danger Bliss posed, their instincts were not as strong as Lin Yao's. After all, Bliss's strength as a mid-level apprentice was too confusing. Yes, in just half a month, Bliss had advanced a small level, from a beginner apprentice to a mid-level apprentice. It was only because his presence was too weak that Gargamel and Merrill rarely paid attention to him, so they didn't notice the change in his rank at the first moment. Ever since he had fused with the mutated insect queen, Bliss's actions had become more and more discreet, almost never appearing in public. Even today, he was wearing an eye-catching black robe, hiding in the furthest corner from the crowd, silently peeping at everyone through the shadow of his hood. Go to the 4th floor and find yourself a suitable room. I have something to tell you tonight. Grimm saw the awkwardness in the atmosphere, so he turned to Ellis and said. Bliss bowed under the black robe and responded with a muffled and hoarse voice, then left first. Merrill and Gargamel looked at each other, their eyes filled with confusion. The 4th level of the Wizard's Pagoda was where the wizards stationed in the pagoda lived and rested. Even the more powerful prospective wizards could only live on the 3rd level, and were not allowed to step foot into the 4th level without permission. But now, Grimm had given this authority that belonged to the wizards to a mid-level apprentice. Let's go to my place. Grimm nodded at the three. The situation outside has changed greatly. We need to rearrange many things. Gargamel and Merrill nodded silently. Even though Lin Yao was completely uninterested in these trivial matters, he did not dare go against the wishes of the owner of the Wizard's Pagoda, so he could only follow along. Half an hour later, Through Grimm's narration, Gargamel finally understood everything that happened in Gilna City during this period of time. But when he heard that Grimm was also shackled by his family because of the magic puppet, Gargamel's thin face showed a look of sympathy. After all, he had become a wandering magus because he could not bear the oppression of his family. Especially when he heard that Grimm promised to hand over 2 elemental magic puppets with the power of an elite wizard to the family every year, his furrowed brows never relaxed. As a pharmacist, he had personal experience in refining witchcraft items of the wizard level. As for those apprentice-level magic medicines, those who were slightly more skilled could basically make a batch in 3 to 4 days. As for those wizard-level magic medicines, due to the huge amount of materials needed, and every single one of them had to go through a series of complicated processes such as filtering, processing, purification, quenching and so on, it could easily take 10 days to half a month to complete. And the failure rate was relatively high. As for higher quality magic medicines, with Gargamel's abilities, he was still unable to make them. Currently, his spiritual power was only 7 points. With such a weak spiritual power, he wouldn't be able to handle those high-quality magic medicines, which would take a long time and required precise control of his spiritual power during the whole process. It was precisely because he understood this that he could understand the difficulty of refining 2 elite magic puppets in a year. The entire refining process of these elite magic puppets would probably take at least 2 to 3 months, and if the refinement failed, the time would be doubled. This way, even if everything went smoothly for Grimm, he would still need 4 to 6 months to complete the task assigned by his family. That way, he would have half a year to improve his strength. But if he failed to refine one of the magic puppets, he would only have 3 months left. If he failed twice, he would have to wait in the alchemy lab for a year. Day after day, year after year, staying in the cold and quiet alchemy lab, doing tedious repetitive work over and over again. This kind of life was enough to extinguish the passion of most arcane wizards. This made them the slowest group of people in the Magus community. Gargamel hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he still spoke his mind. He could not understand how someone as astute as Grimm could not see through the methods used by the Cerubo family, and had even agreed to such harsh conditions. Could it be that he was dazzled by the reward of the rank 2 elemental crystal core? Hearing Gargamel's words, Meryl also looked at Grimm worriedly. This time, she had resolutely come to the blazing flame monarch, drawing a clear line between herself and the group of people in her family. If Grimm's strength was suppressed to the point where it was hard for him to improve, then the fate of this group of followers would not be any better. Hence, she was especially concerned about Grimm's reply. "Don't worry." Grimm understood what the two were thinking. "I know what's going on, and I have a way to deal with it. Also," at this point, Grimm paused for a moment. "I've already figured out the way to advance to rank 2, but I need a long period of time to settle and accumulate. Hence, this matter will only benefit me and not harm me. Advance to rank 2. Hearing Grimm's reply, Gargamel and Meryl both revealed shocked expressions. Although Grimm was their master, teacher, he possessed strength that they trusted. But he had only been a magus for 11 years. Now, he was actually thinking about advancing to rank 2. How could this not make them feel as if the world was spinning and the world had gone dark? This was especially true for Gargamel, who had been a magus for more than 70 years. He felt his beliefs crumbling. Was there really such a huge difference between people? Had he been living like a dog all these years? It's not as exaggerated as you think. I just know where I'm heading. Grimm did not expect his casual words to cause his 2 subordinates to show such exaggerated expressions. He could not help but explain, although the direction is clear, the road ahead is still long. I reckon that I won't be able to break through to rank 2 without at least 80 or 90 years. So that was how it was. But thinking about it, Gargamel still felt like he had been abandoned by fate. He did not expect Grim to be able to find his direction so quickly. All right, since you're done asking, it's my turn. Lin Yao had been waiting impatiently. Go. Master, what's up with that black-robed fellow? Why do I have the urge to destroy him the moment I see him? Lin Yao's question immediately pulled Gargamel and Meryl out of their thoughts, and they turned to look at Grim. His name is Bliss, and he was once a beginner apprentice. It was you, Gargamel, who personally brought him into the wizard's pagoda. Grim spoke slowly. Bliss. Gargamel stroked his goatee as he muttered to himself. To be honest, he felt that the name was somewhat familiar, but he could not match the person he saw today with a certain image in his memory. Could it be the first apprentice who wanted to join the wizard's pagoda? But his aura. Gargamel had already remembered, but he could not be sure. With the mental energy of a wizard, things like photographic memory and memory recall were child's play. But when a wizard recognized a person, they relied more on the aura of their soul than their physical appearance. When a person's life and soul were mixed together, they could form a completely different aura. This aura could be strengthened or weakened, and it could also change according to the changes in the source of the soul. But to completely change the aura of one's soul in such a short period of time was almost impossible. At the very least, a wizard apprentice should not have such a strange technique. Some time ago, Mary returned from another dimension. She killed the evil worm in Titch, and after wiping away his soul imprint, she gave me the mutated worm queen that had fused with him. So I let Bliss fuse with it. It was just a few short sentences, but there was a soul-stirring story hidden within. The plot was full of twists and turns, and even a book would not be able to describe all of it. Meryl knew a thing or two about the conflict between Grim, Mary, and Intitch. Seeing the confused expressions on Gargamel and Lin Yao's faces, she could only tell them what she knew in a low voice. Then Lady Mary is our mistress? This was the first time Gargamel had heard this, and he actually blurted out what was on his mind. Grim's expression froze. Meryl was already laughing softly at the side. That might not be the case. Teacher still has Sister Alice, and she's not a pushover either. Now that Lady Mary is looking for her, who knows if they'll have a fierce fight? Why is there an Alice? Gargamel was obviously someone who loved to pry into other people's privacy. His eyes lit up as he asked, "Who is this Alice? Why have I never heard Master mention her? Tell me, tell me." Grim quickly interrupted his subordinates, not knowing whether to laugh or cry as he asked, "Gargamel, you still haven't reported to me about the situation around the Flame Monarch. Are the leaders of the magical creatures still quiet? Have they come to the wizard's pagoda to cause trouble?" Hearing Grim's question, Gargamel remembered something. Chapter 466. The Black Forest was never peaceful at night. In the deep and stealthy darkness, there were unpredictable dangers lurking everywhere. Ferocious beasts went out to hunt at night, blood-sucking magic vines camouflaged among the vines, acid-rot swamps that looked like grassland but were actually hideous haunts, as well as ferocious predators that wandered the depths of the forest like phantoms, adding on the legendary defilers, monsters and magical creatures. All these things formed a true wild world full of species and rich resources, the Black Forest. 60 kilometers north of the Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda was the territory of the Abebe men. It was late at night, but here it was still a tense and busy scene. Teams of Beeman warriors wielding poisoned spears and bows flapped their wings as they darted in and out of the forest, many of them carrying their prey. Most of them were normal forest creatures like horned goats, hyenas, and apes. Berserk apes, carrion beasts, and human mercenaries could also be seen every now and then. Under normal circumstances, every team of Bee-men was made up of 15 Beeman warriors. Following a certain pattern, they walked through the Black Forest 30 miles around their nest, carefully searching for prey that could be hunted. Every time they encountered a wild beast or magical creature that came out to hunt, it meant that a battle was inevitable. It was precisely because of their terrifying offensive capabilities that none of the B-men teams that returned to their nests were full. The worst team only had 4 B-men warriors that returned. But without exception, they all brought back some spoils of war. The Abebe B-men's nest was built in a dense forest. It was a strange building that looked like a beehive. It was also the B-man queen's delivery room, a special space for her to give birth and nurture her tribe. Ordinary B-men were not qualified to enter the beehive. Only a few specially selected B-men servants were allowed to surround the queen, serving her food and taking care of the eggs that had just hatched. The incubation period of the B-men was very short. It only took 7 days for a wasp egg to hatch into a B-man warrior. As long as there was enough food, a beehive could produce B-man warriors at an explosive rate. According to the wizard's strength classification, a normal B-man warrior's strength was only 0.7. However, even though their individual strength was very weak, as long as a certain number of them gathered together, the danger they posed would skyrocket. It had wings that allowed it to fly, and it also had exquisite poison-making skills. It could use its bow and arrow to launch long-range attacks, and it could also carry its 3-pronged spear to launch diving attacks in close combat. With all these advantages piled together, coupled with their endless numbers, once the Abebe B-men gained a foothold, they would quickly become the overlords of the nearby forests. In this vast dark forest, apart from powerful monsters like the giant barbarian elephants and the twin-legged flying dragons that they did not dare to provoke, almost all other creatures and monsters were on the Abbe B-men's prey list. Hence, during the time Grimm was away from the blazing flame monarch, the number of Abbe B-men without any natural enemies to control them grew at an explosive rate. Their disorderly growth undoubtedly posed a great threat to the external organizations that had just been established around the blazing flame monarch. In the short span of 7 to 8 days, the Gargamel had already received news of the deaths of 2 foreign apprentices and a dozen troop. In a short period of time, the blazing flame monarch had classified a 30 to 40 mile area around the Abbe B-men's nest as an extremely dangerous zone. The wizard's pagoda had even banned anyone from entering this area. However, the appearance of an overly powerful group of magical creatures around the blazing flame monarch was not a good thing no matter how one looked at it. Hence, on the one hand, troops and low-level apprentices were forbidden from approaching the hunting zone of the Abbe B-men. On the other hand, the wizard's pagoda had also issued an internal extermination mission, calling for high-level apprentices to systematically clean up these disorderly magical creatures. A battle had just ended near a small, desolate mountain stream. A scarlet flame tiger that was 3 meters long and weighed 300 kilograms had become the prey of a hunting team of B-men. The dead scarlet flame tiger lay motionless on the grass in the forest, its bright yellow body covered in red magical markings pierced with short black arrows. There were even 2 broken spears protruding from its neck. The weak strength of the B-men warriors was not enough to kill the berserk scarlet flame tiger, but the poison on their weapons could. Hence, this unlucky lone scarlet flame tiger had been poisoned to death. However, the berserk fireballs that the scarlet flame tiger spat also caused great damage to the hunting team of B-men. 4 B-men warriors could not dodge in time and were blasted into pieces, while 3 more died from the terrifying bite and flaming tail of the scarlet flame tiger when they were diving down to attack. The remaining 8 B-men warriors also suffered some damage from the flames, but this did not stop them from happily cutting up the scarlet flame tiger's body and transporting the meat back in batches. The flesh of magical creatures that were rich in elemental energy was a great tonic, and one of the favorite foods of the B-men queen. However, just as they were busy surrounding the carcass of the scarlet flame tiger, a sound came from the forest not far away. A humanoid creature hidden in a thick black robe appeared in the vision of the B-men warriors. A human. Not only was it a human, it was also the queen's favorite human spellcaster. Because in this forest, Only the so-called sorcerer apprentices dared to run around in black robes. The bee-men warriors were overjoyed. Buzz, 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 the sound of bee-like wings flapping could be heard. The 8 bee-men warriors threw away the bloody items in their hands, grabbed their spears, and instantly flew into the air. In order to avoid possible spells from the human acolyte, the few bee-men warriors spread out and quickly approached the black-robed figure under the cover of the dense branches and vines. What surprised them was that the black-robed figure did not try to escape. Instead, it raised its head slightly, and a pair of strange green eyes shot out from the shadow of the hood, coldly glancing at the bee-men. Although the situation was a little strange, the bee-men warriors still followed the fixed procedure and attacked the enemy. The first wave of attack was naturally the semi-long-range poisoned arrows. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. 8 poisoned arrows passed through the gaps in the forest and shot at the black-robed figure like locusts. The opponent did not have any intention of dodging, nor did he cast any defensive spells. He just stood there and let the poisoned arrows hit his body. From the dull sound of the poisoned arrows entering the body, it could be determined that the opponent was not wearing any metal armor under the black robe. Hence, the 8 bee-men warriors became even more excited, and continuously shot arrows as they closed in. When they were less than 10 steps away from the black-robed figure, they threw away the longbows in their hands and swooped down with their 3-pronged spears. When the 8 spears pierced into the opponent's body with a piercing sound, the black-robed figure suddenly let out a strange, sharp insect hiss. His entire body suddenly exploded into a sky full of black beetles, instantly drowning the 8 bee-men warriors in the terrifying swarm of beetles. It was the first time the bee-men warriors had encountered such a terrifying counterattack. They screamed in fear and tried to pull themselves up, but their heads, faces, bodies, legs, and even their translucent wings were covered in a layer of strange black beetles. What made them even more terrified was the strange rustling sound that sounded like silkworms gnawing on mulberry leaves, and the terrifying pain they felt in their limbs. A few of the stronger bee-men warriors barely managed to flap their wings and fly up, but because they could not see, they crashed into the branches and fell down. The bee-men warriors struggled frantically and retaliated. Many of the black beetles that were only the size of soybeans were crushed into a bloody paste, and the poison turned them into black goo. However, the remaining numbers were enough to kill these 8 unlucky fellows who did not have any other spells. Soon, the forest regained its peace. Only the strange rustling sound that made one's hair stand could be heard in the quiet and serene dark forest. After a while, the black beetles that had eaten their fill once again gathered together, once again taking the form of Bliss. The acolyte who had won the first battle stood quietly in the blood-stained ground, silently enjoying the sweet blood energy coursing through his body. Although the Abbé bee-men were a type of magical creature, they had the characteristics of bees and elves, and were considered a type of humanoid magical creature. If it was in the past, with Bliss's personality, he would never have done such a cruel thing like eating his opponent raw. But today, after fusing with the mutant insect queen, everything before his eyes seemed so natural, and he was no longer surprised. This is the world of my dreams. Ever since the fusion was successful, Bliss's violent and bloodthirsty nature had been greatly suppressed by Grimm. Although he had secretly hunted for a lot of blood food, those weak humans did not give him much energy to evolve. In comparison, magical creatures with elemental energy were the most suitable food. Of course, those sweet and tasty human acolytes were also walking delicacies. But Grimm's master had given him strict orders that he could not eat wizards and acolytes without permission. Thus, Bliss could only suppress his urge to hunt in the wizard's pagoda, and under his master's orders, he came here to cause trouble for the Abbé bee-men. After finishing his meal, Bliss continued to move forward with heavy steps into the depths of the forest. Behind him, the dense swarm of beetles wrapped in scattered pieces of flesh followed him closely like loyal hunting dogs. Bliss had only barely completed the evolution of his insect body and obtained the immortal insect body, but he had yet to breed a single mutant beetle to fight for him. In this state, he was undoubtedly extremely weak. If he encountered the powerful magical creature leaders, he could only turn around and run for his life. Chapter 467. In one night, 2 bee-men teams that went out to hunt had disappeared. This immediately made the beehive restless and restless. After the sky brightened, the beehive that had just quietened down became noisy again. Teams of fully armed bee-men warriors rushed out of the beehive and began to carefully search the area where the missing teams were patrolling. The battlefield was quickly discovered, but there were surprisingly few traces of battle. Apart from some traces of fire and some broken arrows and spears, there were no remains of any corpses, not even a piece of flesh. This was rarely seen in battles against magical beasts. Judging from the situation, the bee-men hunting team had encountered the scarlet flame tigers. However, what the commander of the bee-men could not understand was that if the number of scarlet flame tigers was too large for them to handle, the bee-men hunting team could just fly high and hide in the treetops to escape unscathed. There was no need for a direct confrontation with the tigers. Since the bee-men hunting team and the scarlet flame tigers fought, it meant that the leader of the team believed that they could defeat the bee-men. So, where were they now? It could be seen that the scene of the battle had been carefully cleaned up. It was so clean that not even a piece of flesh could be found. If not for the strange smell of the scarlet flame tigers, the commander of the bee-men would have suspected that a human magus had intruded into their territory. However, the style of the battle did not seem to be that of a human magus. Those greedy human sorcerers were not cruel and bloodthirsty monsters. After they killed their prey, they would only take the organs or parts of the prey that had the richest life essence. They would not be like the most cruel monsters who would not let go of even a little bit of flesh. Just as the commander of the bee-men was flapping its wings and flying around the scene, hoping to find some clues, a bee-man warrior rushed to its side while panting. There's a demon's nest. This bee-man warrior that had run back from afar to deliver a message was obviously greatly frightened, even his words were stuttering. This made the commander of the bee-men's heart tighten. A moment later, the commander of the bee-men brought a large group of bee-men warriors to the demon's nest. This used to be the nest of a terrifying gray bear, but with the arrival of the Abbey bee-men, this cave of about 20 square meters lost its owner forever. However, it was obvious that this place had been occupied by some terrifying demon last night. This place was like an abandoned insect nest. The ground and walls were covered with a layer of strange fungal carpet. In the middle of the cave there were 5 or 6 mounds of earth that looked like ant mound. However, they had already been pushed down and destroyed, and the terrifying appearance of the towering mounds could no longer be seen. As soon as it stepped into the cave, the bee-man commander was disgusted by the pungent smell of blood. However, when its gaze landed on the collapsed mounds, the beekeeper commander could no longer suppress its anger. These damned bastards! These damned anthill nests were actually built with the flesh and blood of the bee-men warriors, wood chips and wet soil. Amidst the collapsed nest, the bee-man commander saw half a wing and the stinger of the bee-man. Judging from the situation at the scene, this was simply a farm where the damned alien insects were devouring the flesh and blood of the bee-men warriors. However, they were a step too late. Those damned alien insects had already hatched and moved away. Send out all the patrols and search every part of the forest. We must find those damned bastards. The bee-man commander's shrill roar immediately rang out in the cave. As the order was given, teams of bee-men warriors swarmed out, turning the entire dark forest into a chaotic quagmire in the blink of an eye. Everything that happened in the faraway forest clearly did not affect the normal life in the Flame Monarch's wizard pagoda. Grimm had just finished tempering his mental energy and returned from the underground lava sea when he received a message from Blit. He had successfully set up his roots in the Abbey Beeman's territory and had successfully hatched 5 thorn scorpion larvae. Yes, after Blitz fused with the mutated insect queen, due to the difference in their attributes and talent, what hatched was not a carrion beetle, but a thorn scorpion with dual attributes of dark and earth. According to the message sent by Blitz, Grimm had a basic understanding of the thorn scorpion larvae's basic abilities. Unfortunately, the thorn scorpion larvae had lost the ability to fly, but had compensated with the ability to drill into the ground and launch earth and dark element attacks. Their basic attack method was to drill into the ground beneath the enemy's feet, then suddenly charge out to launch a terrifying close-range attack. Their main weapons of attack were the giant chelicerae and sinister mouthparts that grew at the front of their bodies, as well as the venomous stingers on their back. When they attacked, they could cast a weak quagmire spell, causing the enemies around them to sink into a thick, mud-like earth element smoke. Their main attacks also carried the terrifying shadow damage. Of course, if these larvae could successfully mature, they could lurk underground and launch earth spear strikes or shadow ambush. As long as the enemy could not force them out of the ground, they would be almost invincible. If the mature thorn scorpion could evolve into an elite-level magical creature, they could awaken even more terrifying wizard abilities. However, in the absence of actual data and information, Grimm was unable to predict the abilities they might obtain in advance. The hard carapace of scorpion-like creatures could protect them from most physical damage, while the quagmire spell and shadow attack could confine large groups of enemies around them. From this aspect, Bliss's Thorn Scorpion army could grow into a meat shield unit that was good at fighting in chaotic battles. This would greatly relieve the pressure on the elemental demon manticores, allowing them to shine as long-range attackers. After experiencing a planar war, Grimm had vaguely formed his own set of battle experiences. The so-called planar war was just a beautified version of the invasion of a plane. This way, the invaders would not only have to face the suppression of the will of the plane, but they would also have to defend against the flood of natives. In this situation, if the invaders wanted to fight a positional battle, they would be looking for death. Therefore, while maintaining high mobility and concealment, the key to defeating the enemy was to quickly form an army. Be it Grimm's elemental demon manticores, Mary's vampire army, or Bliss's thorn scorpion army, they were all indispensable parts of this strategy. Of course, the difficulty of invading a mature plane with such strength was simply astounding. This was why, after careful consideration, Grimm decided to take action after he became a Grade 2 Magus. By then, their servant army's tactics would have matured. It would not be like now, where everything was just a framework and prototype, and they did not even have a general or commander who could take charge of an area. After a brief understanding of the Blitz situation, Grimm once again focused his attention on himself. This was the second time he had tempered his spiritual force. The last time had caused his spiritual force to drop from 7 to 6. After a period of rest and adjustment, and using many methods to quickly recover his spiritual force, Grimm was finally able to return to the upper limit of 7. However, after this round of tempering, his mental power plummeted to 5.8 points again, causing his mental space to shake violently and continuously. This trembling on the spiritual plane was both good and bad for him. The good was that it could shake the solidified spiritual space and detonate the hidden dangers that were detrimental to the expansion of the spiritual space, giving Grimm more room to develop in the future. The bad was that Grimm's entire body was affected by the trembling. Before he could get rid of the trembling, Grimm could not cast any spells. He even had to be careful when using his spiritual force to avoid interfering with the self-adjustment of his spiritual space. Of course, the spells stored in the secret scroll of voodoo were an exception. According to Grimm's estimates, even if he had enough potions and resources, it would take him 5 to 7 days to get rid of the trembling. Considering the endurance of his body and the need to nourish his spiritual force, Grimm felt that it would be best to set the interval between tempering his spiritual force at 10 to 15 days. During this period, He almost lost the ability to cast spells as a magus. He could only rely on the wizard's pagoda and the tight defensive spell formation to protect himself. If this weakness was grasped by his enemy, then Grimm's life would really be in danger. 2 days later, Wizard Kogan arrived at the Flame Monarch's wizard's pagoda with a large amount of materials. Along with him were the goblin cabbie and many of Grimm's apprentices. The place was bustling with activity, and there were more than 20 of them. These were the materials the Solubo family had assigned to Grimm over the past 10 years, and they were all packed up and sent over. It could be seen that after the new contract was signed, the higher-ups of the Solubo family's attitude towards Grimm had changed. They had gone from trying to suppress him to trying their best to support him. It seemed that Lord Senazar was very confident in successfully dispelling Grimm's ambitions, to the point that he did not mind giving Grimm some benefits in advance. Of course, Grimm knew this in his heart. Under Merrill and Gargamel's control, the Blazing Flame Monarch held a grand banquet to welcome Wizard Kogan's arrival. They also used this banquet to let the apprentices who had joined the wizard's pagoda before and the new apprentices get to know each other. After all, the Blazing Flame Monarch's wizard's pagoda would be their place to live, learn, and train for a long time. As such, the Blazing Flame Monarch's wizard's pagoda now had 3 wizards. Grimm, Merrill, and Gargamel. Lin Yao and Mary were not included yet. 5 prospective wizard apprentices, 11 high-level wizard apprentices, 34 mid-level wizard apprentices, and several beginner wizard apprentices. Chapter 468. Wizard Kogan's arrival was a pleasant surprise for Grimm. The Blazing Flame Monarch's wizard pagoda had been guarding the Black Forest for a long time, and it had already gathered a large number of magical creature materials, including many wizard-level magical creatures. If they wanted to extract the most value from them, killing them and extracting their magic organs was undoubtedly the best way to do so. If they could tame them, it would undoubtedly be the best. However, the Blazing Flame Monarch had not been able to find a beast tamer with enough strength, so they could only give up on the idea. After much consideration, they decided that turning them into loyal and obedient wizard beasts was more beneficial to the wizard's pagoda. When Wizard Kogan arrived, Grimm took the opportunity to ask him to stay and help the Blazing Flame Monarch digest the magical creature resources that they had recently accumulated. The corpse of an elite giant berserk baboon, a twin-legged flying dragon, a red flame tiger, 7 razor boars, and 23 berserk baboons. From this, one could see the importance of leader-level monsters to the tribe. With the death of the leader, the giant berserk baboon, the other berserk baboons lost their only protection and became easy targets for the surrounding magical creatures and the apprentices of the wizard's pagoda. It could be said that almost half of the berserk baboon tribe had fallen into Grimm's hands. As for the rest, they either escaped far away or became food for other magical creatures. In the Black Forest, there was no such thing as firm friendship and love. When the giant berserk baboon was alive, even the twin-legged flying dragon king had to be polite to it. However, once the giant berserk baboon fell, the first to attack its tribe were the powerful twin-legged flying dragons. Wizard Kogan was also surprised that Grimm could bring out so many living magical creatures in one go. Other than delivering the first batch of Level 2 elemental crystal cores, he also wanted to help his family repair their relationship with Grimm. Therefore, Kogan agreed to Grimm's small request without hesitation. However, Wizard Kogan hoped that Grimm would pay for the cost of creating the wizard beasts with elemental magic puppet. Grimm, of course, agreed to this. Back in the Plain of Knights, Grimm had come into contact with some wizard beasts. In short, the so-called witchcraft beasts were wild beasts that had been transformed by witchcraft. Wizards used special methods to erase the memory and part of the intelligence of the beast, and then implanted some kind of control runes to make it obedient to them. Once in a battle, a wizard only needed to give an order to stimulate the viciousness of the wizard beasts, allowing them to attack the enemy without fear of death. Beginner wizard beast remodelers could only make some normal beasts, but as an intermediate wizard beast remodeler, Wizard Kogon could already make those wizard rank magical beasts. That was why Grimm had not been able to turn these magical beasts into the battle power of the wizard's pagoda, even though he had possessed them for a long time. One of the main reasons was that the process of wiping the memories of the magical beasts and implanting the control runes was too complicated. If he was not careful, the abilities of the wizard beasts would drop. In fact, if the wizard beast modification master's technique was not up to standard, the modified wizard beast would lose most of its battle instincts and directly become a fool that only knew how to charge around recklessly. An excellent wizard beast remodeler could preserve the original battle skills and methods of the magical beasts to the greatest extent. They could even restore their intelligence. Wizard Kogon used his spell to examine the giant berserk baboon's body. It was already a powerful elite-level magical beast, so there was a chance that it could be transformed into a wizard-rank wizard beast. As for the rest of the magical beasts, due to the quality of their bodies, they could only be transformed into quasi-wizard-rank wizard beasts. As for the razor boars, their quality was even lower. After the transformation, they would only have the strength of an advanced apprentice. Grimm already knew Wizard Kogon's estimation, so he generously let him do whatever he wanted. When Kogon brought the magical beasts into the wizard beast modification room, Grimm squinted his eyes and began to savor the taste. At this moment, Grimm finally understood the value of the elite-level magical beasts he had provided to his family. An elite-level magical beast leader that had been modified by a wizard beast had lost so much of its battle power. It had even fallen from elite level to the level of a normal wizard. The other magical beasts had also fallen below the level of a wizard. If he were to change these magical beasts into elemental crystal cores, Grimm could guarantee that they would all be above the level of a wizard. All of this probably depended on the AI chip's assistance. With the help of the chip, Grimm was able to maximize the power of the elemental crystal cores and turn them into perfect magical puppet crystal cores with the least amount of energy lost. Wizard Kogon did not have his own convenience, so he could only make up for it with his skillful methods and unique skills. This explained why Grimm's elite magical puppets could attract so much attention from his family. However, after comparing it with Wizard Kogon, Grimm suddenly realized that he could not be so realistic when he was making these magical puppets. Many times he needed to go easy. He could not make the magical puppets too perfect. Otherwise, it would attract too much attention from his family. After Grimm returned to his residence, he opened the long wooden box that Wizard Kogon had given him. Immediately, the dense elemental aura began to quickly gather towards the wooden box. A bright glow appeared, so bright that Grimm could barely open his eyes. When he opened the wooden box, there were 7 neatly arranged elemental crystal cores inside. Without the restriction of the spell formation on the wooden box, coupled with the fact that the level 2 elemental essence core itself contained a trace of the aura of laws, even though the owner of the essence core had died, the corresponding elemental particles still lingered around the essence core like a trickle returning to the sea, continuously merging into it. What Grimm saw was a scene of grade 2 elemental crystal cores flickering in and out of the misty fluorescence, as though they were breathing slowly. The regular elemental vibrations set off waves of ripples around the crystal cores, making them shine brighter and brighter. It was as if the crystal cores were covered in layers of elemental halos, making it look even more dazzling. The star core, the starlight, and the constantly dissipating fluorescent light made everything look like a dream. Inside, there was a mysterious principle that could make one's imagination run wild. Grimm stretched out his hand and gently stroked the elemental crystal core. The moment his slender fingertips touched the crystal core, the fire elemental aura in his body and the crystal core's elemental aura intertwined, causing ripples to form in his spiritual space. 3 wind elemental crystal cores, 2 fire elemental crystal cores, 1 darkness elemental crystal core, and one earth elemental crystal core. Different elemental crystal cores could give Grimm a completely different understanding of the element. By analyzing the composition of the cores, Grimm would be able to better understand the differences between Type 2 creatures and Type 2 creatures. When a wizard leveled up, the core of their consciousness was mostly based on the real elemental crystal cores in the bodies of monsters. Hence, a long period of contact with these Class 2 elemental crystal cores was a great help to Grimm's subconscious influence. However, the longer he interacted with these crystal cores, the more questions Grimm had. The owner of these crystal cores had already died, and even their consciousness had disappeared a long time ago. What were these crystal cores relying on to maintain the existence of the law of nature? Could it be that the law of nature could break free from the shackles of the consciousness and solidify in a purely physical form? What was the essence of the law of nature? Where did its power come from? Stroking the beautiful crystal cores that were as bright as stars, Grimm's thoughts drifted, his heart filled with anticipation and desire for the truth of the world that was hidden behind layers of veils. Witchcraft. Witchcraft. In the end, it was still spells and spells. On the surface, witchcraft represented chaos and the unknown, while spells represented known methods and solidified laws. The two complemented each other and could not be dispensed with. Witchcraft represented the ancient Magi's pursuit of truth in the midst of chaos, and it was also their totem. On the other hand, the wizards of the current era only pursued spells that could bring them great power. Grimm, on the other hand, wanted to find a balance between witchcraft and spells. This way, he would be able to see the truth of the world and have the ability to protect himself, so that he would not fall on the path of truth. Of course, this might be too greedy. However, since he had already come this far, what harm was there in being a little greedy? However, just as Grimm's thoughts ran wild as he stroked the elemental crystal cores, the A.I. chip's voice suddenly sounded in his mind. Beep. Successfully analyzed the mutated fire elemental rune. Requesting host's instructions to transmit information? What? The mutated fire elemental rune was already analyzed? Why did it take less than half of the estimated time? With all sorts of doubts, Grimm could not help but receive the data stream from the A.I. chip. With a slight stab of pain in his mind, Grimm felt his spiritual force evaporate by more than half. Only then did he manage to accept the unimaginably terrifying data stream. It was strange. Grimm had clearly received a stream of data that had been analyzed many times, but when it gathered in his mind, a strange rune burning with dark red flames formed in his spiritual space. Dark red flames? What the hell was this? Why did it give him a feeling of extreme danger? It was clearly a flame, but when Grimm probed it with his spiritual force, he could not help but feel as if his brain was going to explode in the next second. Strange, powerful, and dangerous, enduring the discomfort, Grimm's spiritual force connected to the strange fire elemental rune and finally understood its effects. Explosion rune. This was actually an explosion rune. Chapter 469. In the days that followed, Grimm entered the busiest period of his life. His mind that had withered after the training needed a long period of meditation to recover. The continuous tremors in his spiritual space needed to be nurtured slowly, even though the mutated fire elemental runes he had just obtained had been completely analyzed by the A.I. chip. He still needed to continue experimenting if he wanted to turn them into his true battle strength. He needed to appraise the large number of Level 2 elemental essence crystals and build a data model. The strange changes to Bliss Body also needed to be created. The governance around the blazing flame monarch also needed to be standardized. The nurturing of the apprentices in the wizard's pagoda could not be ignored. Grimm, who had always been a loner, had never thought that forming a healthy faction would be so troublesome, or that the internal affairs of the wizard's pagoda would be so complicated. If not for the help of Merrill and Gargamel, he would not have been able to run the blazing flame monarch's pagoda in an orderly fashion. Only now did he understand why so many high-level magi would rather rely on a magus family than go out and create a new faction. It turned out that supporting a new faction was such a difficult and torturous task. There were not enough magi in the wizard's pagoda. Hence, under Meryl's strong request, even Grimm had to take up classes on high-level wizard technique. Fortunately, he only had to take 2 days off every 2 weeks. Otherwise, Grimm would have chased all the apprentices away. Right now, he was like a clockwork top. He couldn't have a moment of peace. He spent his days shuttling between different wizard research labs, following up on 7 or 8 wizard research projects. Even when he had free time, he still had to make preparations for the magic puppets he was about to start. Perhaps the only time he could relax was when he closed his eyes and meditated after exhausting all of his mental energy. According to the AI chip's calculations, his spiritual space had never been peaceful ever since he started training, always in a state of constant turbulence. Correspondingly, the efficiency of his meditation had increased by quite a bit. This meant that the spiritual training technique he had modified based on his own conditions had the effect of improving his natural aptitude. The gnome cabbie had also successfully moved his gnome shop to the Blazing Flame Monarch, becoming the biggest secret technique merchant in the wizard's pagoda. The goblin magic equipment it promoted was cheap, easy to operate, and had strange effects. It had also become a new thing that sorcerer apprentices were happy to try. If they wanted to lure the stupid ogres into the ambush from afar, the mechanical chickens were a good choice. The apprentices did not have enough wizard power, so the alchemy bombs could help them maintain their attack power when their wizard power was depleted. When the team was chased by terrifying monsters, the rocket boots could save their lives. When the prey hid in a dark cave and refused to come out, the self-exploding chickens could make it change its mind. Although these magical machines from another plane always had all kinds of problems, such as the wrong setting of the mechanical chicken, which would lead the ogres to the operator, or the alchemy bombs, which would only make 2 explosions when thrown, or the rocket boots, which would allow you to have intimate contact with a tree, no matter what, when you had an additional choice, life would always be more surprising or frightening than before. Taking advantage of the fact that the elemental magic puppets had just become famous, Grimm began to try to sell some of them in Cabbie's gnome shop. In the first batch of magic puppets, almost all of them were at the level of quasi-magi, and they were involved in the few branches of earth, fire, water, and wind. There were only 10 of them, and they were priced at an astonishing 1,100 magic crystals. According to Grimm's analysis, this price was a little high. After all, the basic reward for a mission for an ordinary sorcerer apprentice was around 20 to 30 magic crystals. Even the most dangerous missions would cost more than 100 magic crystals. The quasi-wizard magic puppets were definitely not attractive to wizards, and the apprentices could not afford them. It would be very difficult to sell them. However, Grimm had underestimated the passion of sorcerer apprentices to increase their own strength. If high-level sorcerer apprentices brought along a quasi-wizard helper when they went out, as long as they did not encounter a real sorcerer or a powerful quasi-wizard, they would be able to do whatever they wanted. For high-level sorcerer apprentices who were stuck in the middle of their journey, this was like a gift from the heavens. One apprentice might not be able to afford it, but 2 or 3 apprentices pooled their money together and managed to gather an astronomical sum of 1,100 magic crystals. Thus, many teams of apprentices who often went to the depths of the Black Forest to hunt for magical beasts used magic puppets in actual combat. Among these elemental magic puppets, the apprentices loved the stone puppets and rock pythons the most. With their help, the thick-skinned beasts and magical beasts would never be able to break through their formation. With these super meat shields, many exquisite teamwork and battle tactics could be used to their fullest potential. The magical beasts that required meat shields in the past could now be easily dealt with by a stone puppet. The probability of casualties in the team was greatly reduced, and the time needed to rest and recruit new teammates was also reduced. This way, the members of the team were fixed, and the level of teamwork increased exponentially. Furthermore, bringing the heavy prey back to the wizard's pagoda after every victory was no longer a problem. Due to the convenience and power of the elemental magic puppets, many teams of apprentices came up with a set of battle tactics, using the elemental magic puppets as the core of the team to create a different battle team. As the teams returned from the gnome shop with a full load of elemental magic puppets, the supply of elemental magic puppets gradually fell short. According to the feedback from the apprentices, Grimm found that the most popular low-level magic puppets were the earth and water element magic puppet. One had thick skin and could resist magical beasts, while the other had a large area of effect quagmire spell. Both were the most popular elemental magic puppet. In comparison, fire, wind, and poison element magic puppets were not favored by the apprentices, and some even rejected them. The main reason for this was that even though these magic puppets had powerful attacks, they were too destructive to the bodies of their prey. This would greatly reduce the quality of the spoils of war of the apprentices, reducing their magic crystal earnings. Thus, after learning from the first batch of magic puppets, Grimm changed the second batch of magic puppets he put into the gnome's shop a month later. They were all earth and water element magic puppets. Of course, to add to the fun, Grimm intentionally put in a wizard-level earth element magic puppet, Howler, wizard-level magic puppet, and it was the earth element magic puppet that the apprentices liked the most. This immediately caused a frenzy among the apprentices of the Blazing Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda. Even though the price of 3,500 magic crystals was enough to stop most of the apprentices, it could not stop the enthusiasm of the prospective wizards. The gnome cabbie decided to go with the flow and held a small auction in the gnome shop, allowing the prospective wizards to raise the price. After a heated auction, the veteran quasi-wizard Sabrina finally won the roar at the price of 5,200 magical crystals. That night, in order to test the power of the Howler magic puppet, Sabrina openly challenged the other 6 prospective wizards of the Wizard's Pagoda to a battle. Sabrina and the Howler against the other 6 prospective wizards. Would Sabrina be able to control a wizard-level magic puppet with her prospective wizard-level mental energy alone? Filled with endless questions, the 6 prospective wizards happily agreed to the battle and had a friendly match in the lava hall in front of the Wizard's Pagoda. The result was out of everyone's expectations. The combination of Sabrina and the Howler had defeated the 6 quasi-sorcerers effortlessly. The Howler, with its heavy, rumbling footsteps, possessed the abilities of Earth Tremor, Giant Rock Throw, and Rock Armor. It completely dominated the battlefield. Actually, with just the Howler's massive rock body, it carried the level 2 earthquake spell wherever it passed. An ordinary apprentice would not even be able to stand steadily beside it, much less fight it. Its heavy stone fists and giant rock throw seemed to be able to crush all the defensive wizard spells of apprentices. Even the prospective wizard known for his earth element defense would vomit blood after being slapped away by the Howler. The rest of the weaker ones did not even dare let the Howler's stone fists graze them. But when faced with such a barbaric fellow, could they just attack with wizard spells from a distance? Then the Howler would immediately gather a massive amount of earth element between its palms and launch a long-range throw. To be honest, anyone who saw a rock larger than a horse carriage rolling toward them would not have the mood to continue chanting wizard spells. They would only scream and run as fast as they could. What Sabrina needed to do was to control the Howler to casually walk through the crowd, then force a few prospective wizards to raise their hands and surrender. This was a one-sided battle. After the battle, the few prospective wizards gathered together to ponder over the painful experience and came to this conclusion. Unless they could find a way to restrict the Howler's rampage, they would not have the time to focus fire on this big fellow. The Howler's rock body was half a meter thick, and coupled with its rock armor that could continuously repair, it was not something that could be destroyed with just 2 or 3 wizard spells. Hence, this also proved the powerful dominance of wizard-level magic puppets over wizard acolytes. Along with Grimm's magic puppet craze, Gargamel also began to vigorously promote internal contribution points within the Blazing Flame Monarch. As long as every wizard acolyte completed the missions issued by the Wizard's Pagoda, they would receive a corresponding amount of contribution points in addition to regular magic crystals. With these contribution points, they could enter the internal library of the Wizard's Pagoda or purchase some special items of the Blazing Flame Monarch, such as custom-made magic puppets, high-level wizard potions, or personal tutelage by a wizard. In short, using these methods, Grimm and Gargamel once again spread the name of the Blazing Flame Monarch. Chapter 470. The Tower of Destiny. The daily morning prayer ceremony had just ended. Close to 100 witches' apprentices left the ceremony hall one after another. Only Chef was left behind, silently waiting for Alice's orders. After half a year together, Alice, Chef, and Sophia's relationship was much better than before. Especially under Chef's mediation, the relationship between Alice and the Deceit Witches was much better. Even the leader of the Deceit Witches welcomed Alice to visit the Moya family when the time was right. To Alice, this was good news no matter what. "Alice, why did you ask me to stay behind?" Chef could not help but ask curiously after bowing and waiting for a long time, only to see Alice frowning silently in a daze. "Today." Alice suddenly woke up and could not help but murmur, "There will be a guest from afar coming to visit. I hope you can help me receive her." Chef looked up at Alice's complicated eyes and asked softly, "Will she make a move?" Alice first nodded, then shook her head and said in distress, "I'm not sure." Chef could not help but be even more surprised. Ever since Alice officially became a Witch of Destiny, there was almost nothing she could not solve within her abilities. Could it be a high-grade magus this time? Just as Chef could not help but speculate, Alice had already seen through her thoughts and smiled bitterly. "It's not an enemy, but a former sister of mine. My relationship with her is very complicated. Meeting her like this might cause conflict. So, before meeting her, I need to do some divination." "Understood." Chef nodded. "I will receive her personally. I promise I won't let her cause any trouble." After Xuefu walked out of the hall, Alice sighed silently. She turned to the little elf on her shoulder and instructed, "Go prepare the astrological platform on the top floor. I'll go there immediately after I'm done bathing." The little elf was dozing off in boredom, and immediately became excited when she heard this. "Helen will go now. I promise I'll arrange everything properly." Elemental elves like her loved places with strong elemental aura, and every time Alice held a divination ceremony on the top floor, she would gather the majestic power of destiny. Being able to smell the aura of destiny from the side was also a rare and wonderful enjoyment in the boring life of an elemental elf. Looking at Helen flapping her translucent wings and flying further and further away in a trail of starlight, Alice turned to face the west and couldn't help but let out a soft sigh again. Tower of Destiny, 30 miles west. In the azure sky, 5 strangely shaped bats flapped their wide bat wings, streaking across the sky like sharp arrows, flying with all their might toward the tall wizard's pagoda at the end of the horizon. Below them was the remote and desolate Dragonbone wasteland. There was barely any greenery on the vast land. In his line of sight, apart from the yellow-brown soil, there were also piles of huge skeletons buried in the sand. The wind gently blew across the ground, and when it passed through the gaps between the giant bones, it would occasionally let out a sobbing sound similar to the weeping of souls. Groups of monsters could be seen in the wilderness from time to time. This place was simply a cursed place filled with ominous signs. Even when flying over the Dragonbone wasteland, Mary could smell the thick dragon soul curse power. "Master, why do I feel a chill in my heart? This place seems a little creepy." Wenlier, who was extremely sensitive to the outside world, couldn't help but ask as he flew. Of course it's creepy. Mary sneered in disdain. Back then, the most powerful Witch of Destiny sacrificed 9 giant dragons here for this Tower of Destiny. That's why this place is called Dragonbone Wasteland. Master, you mean that what we saw just now were dragon bones? Wenlier was so shocked that he almost fell from the sky. Maybe not. Mary shook her head. Don't even think about getting those dragon bones. If they were so easy to get, do you think they would still be here for tens of thousands of years? The dragon curse power here is disgusting. Let's leave quickly. After saying that, the few of them increased their speed and flew toward the Tower of Destiny as fast as arrows without alarming the groups of monsters roaming around them. When Mary and the rest arrived at the Tower of Destiny, it was already nightfall. The dark night shrouded the Dragonbone Wasteland. Sparse stars appeared at the end of the horizon. The tall spire of the Tower of Destiny lit up with a dazzling light. A beautiful elemental halo appeared around the tower, rippling outwards. It was a beautiful sight against the dark night sky. Is there a divination ceremony going on? Could it have something to do with my arrival? Thinking slowly, Mary descended when she was still half a mile away from the Tower of Destiny. With that glimpse, Mary could clearly see a lonely, pretty figure standing quietly at the door of the tall Tower of Destiny, as if waiting for something. Since you're here, please come into the tower. Xue Fu has been waiting here for a long time on the orders of the Tower Master. With her superhuman senses, even though she couldn't see Mary, Xue Fu knew that the person she was waiting for had arrived. You're not Alice? In the darkness, Mary walked with determined steps toward the wizard's pagoda. Her red eyes stared at the other party without blinking. This was a beautiful witch with an arrogant and demonic charm. She was tall and slender, with a curvaceous body. Her skin was translucent and fair, and her face was exquisite and perfect. Her bright red lips held a cold smile. What attracted the most attention was the pair of red eyes that shone in the darkness. They were translucent like 2 perfect rubies, exceptionally mesmerizing. You must be Lady Mary? Xue Fu sized up Mary, and her heart trembled. She lowered her head and bowed according to Alice's instructions. Lady Alice is already waiting for your arrival in the tower. Please follow me. With that, Xue Fu turned around and disappeared into the door of the wizard's pagoda. What a show of strength! Mary smiled coldly. The Tower of Destiny stood before her, and this was undoubtedly Alice's home turf. If she didn't go in, wouldn't it mean that she was afraid of her? But if she entered her territory, she might really be tricked by her. Even though she was still hesitating, Mary's body did not hesitate to step into the light membrane and enter the Tower of Destiny. Behind the light membrane was the Wizard Hall on the first level of the Tower of Destiny. At this moment, it was obviously the time for the witches' apprentices to do whatever they wanted. They gathered in groups of 2s and 3s, chattering and laughing, discussing problems in low voices, or setting up a small stall to sell the little things they had made. When they saw Xue Fu, they immediately moved to the side of the road and bowed. Xue Fu maintained her cold demeanor, leading Mary to the top level of the tower. Mary followed behind him. Her scarlet eyes gently swept across the hall, almost seeing through all the witch apprentices. Among the 100 witch apprentices, there was not a single prospective wizard, and the strongest was only a high-level apprentice. 60 to 70% of them were beginner apprentices. This level of apprentices was not worthy of the Tower of Destiny in front of her. As the leader of the Witches of Destiny, and one of the powerhouses of the Northern Witches, her strength was actually weaker than the team that Grimm had casually assembled in the Blazing Flame Monarch. This Alice seemed to be doing much worse than she had imagined. Xue Fu brought Mary to a guest hall on the 8th level of the tower and sat with her in silence. It was obvious that Xue Fu was not good at conversing, and Mary was not someone who would look for things to talk about. Hence, the two sat opposite each other, quietly waiting with their eyes closed. Not long after, Xuefu began to meditate without saying a word. Mary opened her red eyes and looked at Xuefu's jade-like skin, her eyes filled with unconcealable surprise. That Alice really had a big heart. She actually sent such a subordinate to receive him. Wasn't she afraid that she would suddenly attack? At such a distance, Mary was 100% sure that she would be able to kill her before her opponent could react. Another hour passed, and the dense torrent of fate on the top level of the Tower of Destiny began to subside, as if the divination ceremony had ended. As expected, a sweet female voice sounded in the guest hall half an hour later. "Sister Mary, you really came." After saying that, a beautiful woman with a slender and graceful figure wearing a purple starry robe walked into the hall. "Alice!" Mary stood up in confusion. Although she had heard that Alice's body and appearance had changed dramatically after she became a Destiny Witch, the contrast between the woman in front of her and the image of the Lolita in her mind was too great. This made her unable to accept it for a moment. "Sister Mary, I am so happy that you came to see me as soon as you came back." Alice smiled sweetly as she walked to Mary's side. Xuefu stood up silently and moved behind Alice. "Happy? What is there to be happy about?" Mary said coldly. "Didn't your divination skill tell you that I am here to fight you?" Alice's smile froze. This Mary was still so straightforward. She had already acted so kind, but the other party was still so unforgiving. "Cough, seems like I can only use that move." Alice slowly put away her smile and looked at Mary, who was full of fighting spirit, and said calmly, "We are not enemies, but allies." "I know we are allies." Mary's answer was still straightforward. "I have already fought with Grimm. I can't beat him, so I will listen to him. Now I want to fight with you. Whoever wins will have to be obedient in the future." What a strong logic! Chapter 471. Unfortunately, the battle that Mary had been planning for a long time did not start. Alice, on the other hand, used a single sentence to extinguish her opponent's surging desire for battle. "Sister Mary, don't you want to get rid of the bloodline binding you?" Seeing that Mary was eager to fight at any time, Alice could only take out her trump card. The words bloodline binding were like a sharp awl, piercing into Mary's heart. Her bloody eyes widened, her long hair fluttered, and the bat wings behind her suddenly spread open. Her fighting spirit was raised to the limit. "What did you say?" Mary's expression suddenly became cruel and fierce, and she approached Alice with her claws and fangs bared. "I said, I have a way for you to find the vampire who bestowed your bloodline." Alice was not moved by Mary's abnormal state at all, and her tone did not change at all. Behind her, Xuefu's skin suddenly became more translucent, and the violent and ferocious snowstorm lingered in her body, looking like it was about to erupt. When Mary had got within 5 paces of Alice, she did not go any further. She could feel that if she took half a step forward, the person behind Alice who manipulated the ice and snow would explode. Her surging aura pressed down on Alice's body tightly, and her blood-red eyes stared at her without blinking for a moment. Alice did not dodge at all, and looked straight into Mary's eyes that were filled with power and anger, and there was incomparable determination and confidence in her eyes. At this moment Mary finally understood. Alice, who had always been a little girl in her eyes, had indeed grown up. Not only was her temperament strong to the point that it surprised her, but even her knowledge seemed to be much higher than hers. At this moment, standing in front of her was no longer the black-bellied little girl who pretended to be cute, but a real witch whose temperament was immeasurably mature. Mary had made up her mind on the way here that she would have to fight Alice first, no matter what excuse she might come up with. But the bloodline binding that Alice mentioned really moved her. This could be said to be the eternal pain in the hearts of all foreign vampires. As foreign vampires, they were different from the real vampires. Most genuine vampires were the descendants of vampire families. Their bloodline was passed down from generation to generation. Therefore, there were almost no restrictions on the bloodline. On the other hand, most of the foreign vampires were genuine vampires who turned ordinary humans into their own kind through the embrace. As for Mary, she was even more special. She was a mutated vampire that Wizard Anderson had accidentally obtained using a vampire's blood and used witchcraft to modify and nurture it. So seriously speaking, Mary should be called a bloodline contaminator. It was because of these accidents that Mary felt a serious bloodline conflict after she became an elite sorcerer. If she did not find a way to resolve the hidden danger rooted in her soul and bloodline, she was afraid that in this lifetime, elite sorcerer would be the limit of her strength. Even if she wanted to increase her strength, that inexplicable bloodline restriction would make all her efforts go up in smoke. The only way to change this was to suck the vampire's blood dry and become a real vampire. These were originally hidden secrets in the depths of Mary's heart. Who would have thought that they would be exposed by Alice here? Therefore, it was no wonder that she was so excited that she almost lost control of her power. After taking a few deep breaths, and trying hard to suppress the violent nature in her heart, Mary finally found her reason. "Speak, I want to hear your conditions." Mary put away her threatening look, and began to talk to Alice in a manner of equal. "I know the whereabouts of the vampire you are looking for." Alice's tense face finally showed a trace of a smile. "Where is he?" Mary could not help but ask anxiously. "Is there a point in asking this?" Alice asked with a smile. "Do you think you can kill him with your men if you know where he is?" "Why not?" Alice put a hand to her forehead in pain. "Vampires have absolute control over their bloodline descendant. Do you think you can still stand in front of that vampire and talk to him? That vampire does not even need to fight you. He only needs to use the bloodline connection to order you to kill yourself, and you will probably choke yourself to death." Mary's body trembled uncontrollably. In the other plane, she had also unscrupulously concocted blood thralls and derivative. In her eyes, those people were simply the cheapest slaves and cannon fodder. They had no privacy or rights at all. When she needed to leave that plane, she even cruelly activated the blood shackles and turned the hundreds of subordinates that she could not take with her into nourishment for her growth. She swallowed them in one gulp. When she did all these things, it was as if everything was so natural and right. But now there was a person who was above her, and he was going to put all of this on her as well. Mary's anger and fear could be imagined. The more she thought about it, the more clear it became. Mary's mind was unprecedentedly calm and rational. She raised her head and stared at Alice. She carefully and slowly asked, "Then what do you think I should do?" "You don't have to worry too much," Alice explained unhurriedly. "I've found your mortal enemy. Fortunately, he is still a grade 1 vampire. So, if we use our strength, we still have a chance to get rid of him. But if we want to get rid of him, you definitely can't make a move. You don't even dare to get close to him. So, I have to personally arrange people. These vampires are very vigilant. If we fail, it will easily alert him. Then, it will be much more difficult to find him again." "I understand." Mary sighed and spoke again. "I owe you for this. In exchange, I will do my best to do something for you. No matter how dangerous it is, I won't back down." Alice breathed a long sigh of relief. She stepped forward and held Mary's hand. She smiled softly. "Since we have reached an agreement, we are naturally good sisters." "Oh yes, Sister Mary, did you know? I used to have a grandmother who loved me very much. But she... At this point, Alice's azure blue eyes suddenly turned red. Tears rolled down her cheek. What happened to her? Mary gritted her teeth and asked. "She was detained by bad people and locked in a terrible place. She is constantly being tortured." Seeing that Alice was about to cry again, Mary knew that there was a big trap in front of her. But for the so-called bloodline binding, she had to go all out. "Okay, don't cry," Mary said irritably. "Don't you just want me to help you save her? Tell me the location and the people. I will go now. Alice, who was choking with sobs just now, immediately smiled. She held Mary's hand and shook it. As expected, Sister Mary cares about Alice the most. Alice will definitely do her best to do things for Sister Mary. After saying that, she quietly went to Mary's ear and whispered a few words. Sure enough, the so-called enemy turned out to be the Dark Witch. This Alice had really found a good opponent for herself. With boundless resentment, Mary sighed and turned to leave. The beehive. As the nest of the Abebe bee-men, the security of the beehive was undoubtedly the strictest. But these days, the appearance of a mysterious specter made the powerful Abebe bee-men fall into endless panic. For more than a month, hundreds of bee-men warriors went missing. This was the gift that the mysterious specter brought to the Abebe bee-men. Moreover, as the mysterious specter grew stronger, he was no longer satisfied with waiting for the bee-men hunting teams to fall into his trap. He began to take the initiative to attack the beemen's territory. Now, even patrolling in the forest near the beehive was no longer safe. With no other choice, the beeman commander could only try to shrink the defense line and increase the number of beemen hunting teams from the initial 15 to the current 30. Due to the lack of food, the beeman queen's rapid expansion of her tribe was curbed. The number of beemen warriors in the beehive decreased from the peak of 560 to the current 436. The hunting teams also decreased from the maximum of 25 to the current 10. The blow to the beehive was simply indescribable. After a detailed investigation by the beemen, they finally figured out that it was not a monster that kept sneaking attacks on the beemen hunting teams, but a human wizard apprentice. This was also the question that the Abebe bee-men could not understand. How did an ordinary human sorcerer apprentice manage to devour so many beekeeper warriors? They finally got the answer to this question through some of the bee-men warriors that managed to escape. That damned human sorcerer apprentice was actually walking the path of a terrifying bloodline sorcerer. He could transform into a horrifying insectoid, and by devouring the bodies of beeman warriors, he could continue to grow stronger and hatch some strange scorpions as his own soldiers. The scorpions he hatched could hide underground. This was also the main reason why the beehive could not find them despite sending out so many search teams. In order to protest against the enemies overstepping their boundaries, the Abebe bee-men even sent messengers to the human wizard's pagoda to complain. Unfortunately, the skinny human wizard who looked like a large mouse actually brought out the peace agreement they had signed and told the beeman messengers while spitting spittle. The wizard's pagoda's wizards stayed obediently in the wizard's pagoda and never stepped foot into the territory of the magical creatures. As for the wizard apprentice's actions, it was not within the jurisdiction of the peace agreement. So, the blazing flame monarch was not responsible for the insect apprentice's actions. If the Abebe bee-men could not stand the sight of him, they could kill him and eat him. It would be futile to complain to the human wizard's pagoda, and they could not ask for help from the other magical creatures around them. Chapter 472. The Black Forest in the afternoon was unusually hot and humid. The tall and straight tree trunks propped up a huge canopy that looked like an umbrella. The tall ancient trees were not far from each other. Their crowns, branches, and vines were all mixed together, forming a dense and deep sea of trees. A faint mist floated in the forest. Sunlight seeped through the gaps between the branches and leaves, forming a slanted pillar of light that decorated the forest like a dream. There were no sounds of beasts or insects in the forest. The soil at the base of a tall ancient tree suddenly rumbled, and a head-sized mound rose up. Countless black beetles surged out from it and gathered into a wriggling human shape. This bugman made of countless beetles stood silently for a while, as if it was communicating with some of its subordinates in the distance. A moment later, the bugman raised its head and turned to look in the direction of the Abebe bee-men's hive. Its heart was filled with doubts. The Abebe bee-men had actually given up on the outer hunting area and the inner living area. All of them had retreated back to their hive. This was obviously out of his expectations. But after some thought, Bliss deduced the possible actions of the Abebe men from the knowledge crystal that Grimm had sent him. The knowledge crystal that Grimm had sent him was quite rich in content. It almost covered the origin of the Abebe men, the structure of their race, the way they ruled, the way they operated their power, the basic data of their members, their fighting style, and the characteristics of their profession. With this data, Bliss could basically beat up these low-grade monsters that were enough to drown his little bug army. Bliss could even set up all kinds of traps and wait for the bee-men to come to him. Bliss could still find the answers he needed from the knowledge crystal about the Abebe bee-men's abnormal actions. The blood locust wasps were probably the only thing that the Abebe bee-men could rely on. The blood locust wasps were terrifying creatures from another world. They had the power of a magus, and were one of the few Abebe bee-men that could surpass the magus rank. For any Abebe bee-man tribe to maintain the existence of a blood locust wasps, they had to sacrifice the lives of 3 to 5 bee-men warriors every day. Therefore, unless the bee queen's tribe grew to more than 1,000 members, she would not easily hatch such a terrifying creature that devoured both her enemies and herself. Now the Abbe bee-men were going crazy from the torture of this annoying bugman, so they couldn't care less about these taboos. They were ready to quickly hatch a blood locust bee to deal with Blit. According to the knowledge crystal, the blood locust swarm had a strong body that was not weaker than a beginner anatomy refinery wizard. They flew extremely fast, and their terrifying guillotine mouthparts could eat raw steel. Not to mention the fact that Blitz's newly hatched scorpions were no match for it, even Blitz was in danger of being hunted down and killed. Humph, I can't afford to offend him, then I'll just hide. Blitz was not a mindless wild monster that would eat to death if it stared at one. Anyway, the mission given to him by Master was to contain the Abebe bee people. Now that he had basically accomplished that, there was no need for him to stay here and fight them to the death. Return to the wizard's pagoda? At the thought of the forest demon's aggressive appearance, Blitz's heart burned with a vicious killing intent. But that forest demon seemed to be the partner of another rat, and that rat was Master's assistant. It looked like he could not easily deal with it. Since I'm not going back to the wizard's pagoda, I'll find trouble with other magical creatures. Master said that the 3-headed magic hound and the Medusa were his traps, and he could not easily deal with them. Then there were not many choices left. Twin-legged flying dragons? No, they could fly, and it would be difficult for them to hunt. Giant barbarian elephants? That would not work either. Their strength and physique were ridiculously strong. With the abilities of the young scorpions, there was no way they could harm them. No matter how he thought about it, it seemed like the crimson flame tigers and ogres were more suitable for him. Blitz's abilities were improving rapidly, and he would probably become a high-level apprentice in another 2 or 3 meals. When that time came, the explosive increase in his mental energy would allow him to control more subordinates, and his battle power would also increase significantly. I'll choose the ogres. They had sufficient numbers, and they were lacking in wizard spells. They were perfect for watering his insect army. After thinking about it, Blitz hesitated no longer. His entire body suddenly collapsed, turning back into countless tiny beetles that burrowed into the ground, then pounced toward the ogre camp in the northeast. Behind him, 7 young scorpions the size of washbasins also burrowed quickly into the ground. On the ground, the 7 mounds of soil quickly moved into the distance, Flame Monarch. An earth-shattering boom resounded. The entire wizard's pagoda trembled slightly. Due to a small mistake, the rune lines inscribed on the level 2 elemental essence crystal were slightly off, and the magical energy became chaotic, resulting in a terrifying explosion. This explosion had clearly exceeded the tolerance of the Alchemy Laboratory's defensive spell formation. The terrifying shockwave spread out, even affecting the entire wizard's pagoda. Grimm opened the door to the laboratory, and he ran out, covered in a thick cloud of black smoke. Behind him, the entire laboratory was in a mess. Broken pieces of the alchemy workbench littered the ground, and the continuous explosions rang out. Corgan, Gargamel, and Merrill rushed to the door after hearing the news. "Are you all right? Are you all right, Master? Are you hurt, Teacher?" 3 people, 3 different greetings, but all they got in return was a series of violent coughs from Grim. Grim's youthful face was pale, and there was even a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. On his body there were a few large holes in his black robe, and there were still some sparks burning. From the looks of it, it was clear that his mind and body had been damaged by the explosion of the elemental essence crystal core. In that kind of environment, any defensive spell would not be able to withstand the continuous explosions caused by the elemental essence crystal core. Even the mind could easily be affected by the elemental shock. Cough. Too bad. Grim coughed violently, feeling extremely vexed. Just a little bit more and it would have been done. My mental power still couldn't keep up. Grim, don't be too anxious. Although Wizard Corgan was disappointed that a level 2 elemental essence crystal core was destroyed just like that, he still needed to comfort Grim on the surface. The mission given to you by the family is still very generous. Don't be in such a rush to try it. It's better to be more stable. Gargamel and Merrill couldn't interrupt in a situation like this, so they could only gather around Grim and help him deal with the more obvious wounds on his body. After resting for a while, Grim's spirit was already a lot better. "It's really a pity this time. Just a little bit more, but I was too anxious and I still failed." "You don't have to be so anxious. You really don't have to be so anxious. From what I see, you need to be more stable. Also, I've finished modifying those wizard beasts you asked me to. There are still a lot of things waiting for me to take care of in the family, so I won't be staying here any longer." Grim had been staying in the lab for the past few days, so Corgan almost never saw him. Therefore, he took this opportunity to say goodbye. Of course, Grim was full of gratitude. He asked Gargamel to bring over the promised reward and personally handed it to Wizard Corgan. Although they were wizards from the same family, they couldn't just do a mission like this for free. Therefore, the necessary reward was necessary. After Gargamel personally sent Wizard Corgan off, the 3 of them once again gathered in the secret room on the 4th floor of the Wizard's Pagoda. "Teacher, is your body really okay? Do you need to meditate and check yourself?" Merrill asked with concern. Grim's hunched back suddenly straightened, and his originally dispirited spirit suddenly became full again. "Master, how did it go?" Gargamel was obviously also involved in this matter. He was nervously rubbing his hands and staring at Grim with a pair of green bean eyes. Merrill was confused by the actions of the 2, and her beautiful eyes could not help but look back and forth between them. Grim did not answer. Instead, he gently swiped his right hand across his waist and flipped it over. A dazzling, crystal-clear magic puppet crystal core appeared in front of them. "It's done. It's done. It's really done." Gargamel immediately danced with joy as he threw himself in front of Grim. He stared at the demon puppet crystal core with his rat-like eyes, his goatee trembling non-stop. Unfortunately, when it came to shiny gems, women were 10 times more sensitive and flexible than men. Before Gargamel could even stretch out his trembling hands, the magic puppet crystal core had already fallen into Merrill's hands. Merrill repeatedly played with the magic puppet crystal core as if she could not bear to part with it. "Is this the elite elemental magic puppet you were talking about? Shouldn't it have been destroyed? Why is it still here? Could it be that you were acting?" Grim and Gargamel did not reply, but they both let out a sinister laugh. "Teacher, even you have been led astray by the sinister Gargamel. This must have been Gargamel's idea. How evil!" Merrill rolled her eyes at Gargamel and continued to play with the precious gem. Gargamel was choked by Merrill's words. He almost couldn't help but shout that this was all Grim's idea, and he was only the one who handled it. Unfortunately, his words were suppressed by Grim's dignified glare. He could only take the blame for this in silence. To be honest, I did not expect to succeed on my first try, so I made some preparations. Fortunately, my luck was good and I managed to succeed. I also managed to deceive that Ko-Gen a little. Grim sighed with emotion. Oh right, only the two of you are allowed to know about this. The other members are not allowed to know. Then what about Ava? Gargamel rolled his eyes. It could be seen that this Gargamel was obedient to the forest demon Aiwa, like an obedient baby. Grim paused for a moment and could only change his words. Only the three of you and Ava are allowed to know, no one else is allowed to know. Chapter 473. Nire Valley. Mary was carefully moving through a shadowy forest. Everything around her was pitch black, and she could see shadows of different shades everywhere. She could vaguely feel the faint aura of life in many of the shadows. Mary had to be very careful to avoid the shadows, because each shadow was actually a twisted and evil shadow creature. They densely covered the entire valley, tightly guarding all the paths leading to the Black Wizard Tower. These shadow creatures might not be very strong, but in Mary's eyes, they were weak life forms that could be destroyed with a single blow. However, in order to avoid alerting the enemy, she could only conceal all her life aura and carefully move through the dense shadow sentries. As a foreign vampire, Mary could easily control the temperature of her blood, thus avoiding the detection of infrared perception and life perception. Coupled with her agility and stealth, these shadow creatures with average strength of an intermediate apprentice would not be able to detect her presence at all. The reason why Mary was so careful was not because of them, but to avoid the shadow mastiffs that moved through the Nire Valley from time to time. They were like the hounds of the material world, with a highly developed sense of smell, and could sniff out the movement of any non-shadow element. Fortunately, Mary was wearing the deception orb that Alice gave her. Under the cover of the strange aura, as long as she was not directly seen by these shadow creatures, she would not have to worry about being seen through. This place was also known as the Black Secret Realm, and it was also the area where the Dark Witch Tower was located. If it wasn't for the promise she made to Alice, Mary would not have come here to seek death even if she had lost her mind. After all, there were rank 2 and 3 dark witches stationed here all year round. Even the leader of the rank 4 dark witches, Circe, spent more than half of a year in this place. Even with Mary's fearless personality, she could not help but tremble slightly at the thought of so many high-grade wizards. No one could bear the crime of plotting to sneak into the dark witches' origin land. Therefore, if Mary did not want to be hunted down by the dark witches all over the world, the only thing she could do was to hide her identity. Just as Mary was moving through the shadow of a gray tree, she suddenly felt a sense of danger. Her body flew up lightly and silently climbed onto a gray tree. Then, she squeezed gently and became one with the gray shadow of the tree. Even though her movements were swift and silent, and she didn't release any aura, she still inevitably caused a trace of wind elemental energy to flow. In the next second, 5 shadow mastiffs emerged from the shadows and sniffed around. In addition to the strong smell of shadows, there was also a trace of wind element in the air. Although they were in the depths of the Shadow Valley, and the overly dense shadow substance repelled most of the magical elements in the physical world, it was not too strange for a small amount of wind elements to enter through the gaps in the shadows. Therefore, the shadow mastiffs spread out and patrolled. When they didn't find anything, they relaxed their vigilance. Thus, with a slight shadow fluctuation, the 5 shadow mastiffs instantly appeared in another shadow 100 meters away through Shadow Leap and continued their patrol. After a long while, Mary finally squirmed out of the shadow of the big tree after confirming that there were no signs of trouble in the surroundings. Seriously speaking, this was no longer the wizard world. The dark witches, with the powerful power of the wizard's pagoda, actually made a small area of the wizard world overlap with the legendary shadow dimension. The overlapping area was also the area covered by the shadow forest in the Nile Valley. This way, the Dark Witches could continuously organize their forces to explore the vast shadow dimension, which had a space comparable to the wizard world. The benefits from this were also obvious. However, the Origin Wizard's Pagoda of the Dark Witches, as the core of the anchoring of the two dimensions, was always in the process of the conflict between the two origins of the dimension. Thus, the periodic eruptions of shadows, and the surprise attacks of the aboriginals of the shadow dimension would have a negative impact on the stability of the Shadow Valley. With Mary's strength as a level 1 vampire wizard, it was simply impossible for her to break into the tightly guarded Origin Wizard's Tower of the Dark Witches. But as long as Alice was there, she could always find a crack in the tightest wall for you to walk through. Thus, Mary moved forward step by step. It took her almost 3 days to travel 4 miles, and she was still 2 or 3 miles away from the towering Dark Tower. But when she reached here, she did not move forward anymore. Instead, she found a slightly quiet clearing in the forest and slowly squeezed her body into the soil between reality and illusion. From now on, until the eruption of the Shadow Tide a month later, she had to be nailed to this place like a nail. If not for the spatial turbulence caused by the Shadow Tide, she would not have any chance of breaking into the Origin Wizard's Tower of the Dark Witches. Only when the Shadow Tide washed and shook this overlapping area would she have the opportunity to take the risk. Of course, what the so-called Shadow Tide was, when it would erupt, Mary had no idea. But even if she did not know, it did not mean that Alice, who controlled the Tower of Destiny, did not know. Alice, who was always watching the Dark Tower, had already planned all the rescue plans. The only thing she lacked was a powerful wizard like Mary, who had the talent of an assassin. Alice had made up her mind to rescue her only relative, the poison centipede, from Ender. As for the consequences, she did not care about anything. Stonehammer Camp. This was a large ogre camp in the depths of the dark forest. The ogre's Stonehammer Mountain had been burned to the ground by Grimm, and it had become a barren mountain. Therefore, the ogres simply set up a huge camp on the mountain, using sharp wooden stakes that were sharpened at one end and as thick as a person's arms wrapped around the entire mountain. The powerful elite ogre warriors, the small leaders, and the terrifying twin-headed ogre wizard naturally lived in the belly of the mountain, while most of the ordinary ogres built simple shacks on the mountainside and lived in them. Due to the lack of planning and decorations, every ogre wandered around as they pleased. The shacks they built were also scattered here and there. They were colorful, and the atmosphere was foul and chaotic. When the sun rose, the small leaders of the ogres came out from the belly of the mountain. As they walked towards the tall gate at the foot of the mountain, they used their thick black feet to wake up the sleeping ogres. "Get up! Get up! All of you, get up! You lazy bums! You don't do much work, but you eat a lot! Smelly head, black face, get up! It's time to go hunting!" Under his continuous beating and cursing, the ogres grumbled as they crawled out of their shacks and empty spaces. They swayed their huge bodies and followed behind the small leader, heading down the mountain. For a time, the entire Stonehammer camp was filled with tall and strong figures. Shouting and cursing could be heard everywhere, and it was bustling like a huge market. There were a total of 87 large and small ogres in the ogre camp. There were 43 adult male ogres, 22 adult female ogres, 14 underage ogre warrior candidates, and 8 ogre cubs. Although the number of adult ogres was only half of the total, for a savage and savage race like the ogres, there were no incompetent ogres who would just eat and wait to die. Almost all of them were tyrannical warriors. Even the female ogres or underage ogres could easily smash the heads of elite human warriors with a wooden stick that was as thick as a human's leg. In the ogre camp, if any ogre reached the age of old and did not die, they would be chased out of the tribe and become a wandering ogre. That was why the ogre camp did not keep useless people who had lost the ability to fight. On a high cliff 5 miles away from Stonehammer Mountain, Billis stood at the top of the cliff, silently watching the black mass of ogres rush out of the gate and disperse into the surrounding dark forest. Unlike the bee-men, the ogres formed a small team of 3. Most of the weapons they used were thick wooden sticks and stone sticks that they had ground themselves. Their hunting range was hundreds of miles wide. 4 adult ogres, if they ran at full speed, they would have no problem running 70 to 80 miles in the morning. This was a testament to their extraordinary strength and physique. Strictly speaking, ogres were also a type of creature that resembled humans. They looked like humans that had been magnified several times. Their bodies were exceptionally strong and their strength was even greater. They were huge, ugly, and greedy magical creatures. Although they were strong, they were simple-minded. Even adult ogres only had the intelligence of a 5-year-old human child. Only mutated ogre sorcerers could break through the limits of intelligence and become terrifying monsters that believed in violence and were cruel and bloodthirsty. Regular ogre warriors had 7 points of strength and 9 points of vitality, according to the sorcerer system. The twin-headed ogre Zack had 11 points of strength, 13 points of vitality, and a whopping 4 points of spirit. Among human sorcerers, 4 points of spirit could only be considered an average sorcerer. However, among the ogres, it was an enviable figure with high intelligence. Billis lowered his head and pondered. Compared to the ogres, the young thorn scorpions he had bred had 4 points of strength, 5 points of vitality, and 2 points of spirit. With these stats, the young thorn scorpions would have a slight advantage in a head-on clash with the Bee-men. However, in a head-on clash with the ogres, they would not be able to withstand a single attack from an adult ogre. It seemed that he could only defeat them with his wits. Chapter 474. Without sufficient stamina, it would be difficult to follow the footsteps of the ogres. The ogre warriors did not stop as they sprinted towards the forest in the distance. After half a year of continuous raids, there were no longer any large creatures that could fill their stomachs within 20 to 30 miles of Sledgehammer Mountain. Hence, to bring back enough prey, the ogres could only advance further. Bliss, who knew nothing about the habits of the ogres, did not expect such a situation. He led the 7 young scorpions and sprinted for more than 40 miles before he finally found the messy battlefield left behind by the ogres. This time, it was a litter of razor boars. They were one of the most commonly seen wild beasts in the dark forest. The razor boars did not possess any elemental powers, only a heavy and sturdy body and a pair of razor-like tusks. Adult razor boars could weigh up to 100 kilograms. With the amber-like resin and gravel mixture on their bodies, it was as though they were wearing a thick layer of armor. In the dark forest, a berserk razor boar could break a tree so thick that it would take 2 men to wrap their arms around it. It was a pity that they encountered the ogre hunting team that was stronger and more skilled in hunting. Hence, this litter of 2 adult razor boars and 3 piglets became the prey of the 3 ogres. While the ogres liked cooked food, they did not know how to start a fire in the wild, so they could only make do with eating and drinking. As warriors who were out hunting, they naturally had the right to fill their stomachs first. Hence, after the hunt was successful, the 3 ogres tied up the 2 unconscious razor boars with tree vines and sat on the ground. Each of them carried a piglet and cut open its abdomen. They dug out its intestines and threw them away, then dug out its heart and started munching on it. In the simple and crude minds of the ogres, they believed that the source of power for all creatures came from the heart. Hence, to make themselves stronger and more powerful, it became their tradition to chew on the heart first. However, while they were chewing and tearing at each other until blood flowed everywhere, a pair of dark green insect-like compound eyes already locked onto them from the nearby forest. Under Bliss's remote control, the 7 scorpions crawled underground in their own unique way. They bit off the roots of the ancient trees and dug through the solid soil, quietly hiding under the 3-headed ogre. The ogres lived up to their reputation as magical creatures. Although they didn't hear anything, They could sense that something was amiss from the slight tremors. Just as they stopped eating and drinking suspiciously, the ground beneath them suddenly split apart. Pillars of dust rolled up and quickly engulfed their bodies. Enemy attack! The ogres instantly understood the situation and threw away the food in their hands. They jumped up and bent down to reach for their weapons. And what surprised them was that all of them had touched empty air. The first wave of scorpions that crawled out of the ground and launched a surprise attack wasn't the ogres, but the crude weapons that the ogres leaned against the tree beside them. The 3 scorpions used their large pincers to clamp down on the thick wooden and stone rods before burrowing into the ground. While the ogres were frantically searching for weapons, the second batch of 3 young centurion scorpions scuttled out of the ground, their razor-sharp pincers piercing into the ogre's thick calves. The ogre that was suddenly ambushed lost his weapon, and could only use his fist, which was as thick as a clay pot, to desperately smash against the young thorn scorpion's carapace. The ogre's 7-point strength crushed the thick earth element surrounding the scorpion's body and pummeled it until its blood splattered everywhere. However, the thorns on the scorpion's carapace also stabbed the ogre's fists until they bled profusely. The pincers that bit into the ogre's calves continuously injected earth element energy into the scorpion's body. Under the control of the scorpions, the thorns pierced into the ogre's body one after another. Although most of the thorns were blocked by the ogre's tough skin, some still pierced into the ogre's body, inflicting horrifying injuries. In terms of individual strength, the ogre warrior was far stronger than the scorpions. In a one-on-one fight, the scorpions were definitely not a match for the ogre warrior. However, the ogre warrior was just an ordinary magical creature, while the scorpions were a true magical creature. 2 young scorpions simultaneously tangled with an ogre warrior. Even though the battle was intense and chaotic, when both sides were riddled with injuries, the 7th young scorpion that suddenly pounced out from underground was the straw that broke the camel's back. Half an hour later, the battlefield regained its peace. The 3 ogres were injected with excessive earth element by the scorpions and finally lost control of their bodies. They flipped over and fell, no longer able to resist. At that moment, a series of rustling noises suddenly sounded. The 3 ogres, who had lost their limbs and had lost the ability to resist, were horrified to find a terrifying black swarm of insects swarming over the ground. When the ogres wanted to scream in fear, the scorpions pierced their necks with their venomous stingers. Thus, the 3 ogres completely fainted. The swarm of insects swarmed over and lifted the 3 ogres and 2 wild boars. Under the escort of the 7 scorpions, they quickly disappeared into the forest. Giant Hammer Mountain. The ogres that had gone out to hunt returned to camp after the sky darkened. They brought back a large amount of prey. The big ones were bison lizards, the small ones were wild boars and hares, and so on and so forth. All the ogres gathered excitedly and started bonfires in the camp, using large stone pots to cook delicious meat. This was probably the only cooking skill that all the ogres in the world possessed. As the ogres were muscular and simple-minded, they did not realize that 6 of their companions had gone missing on the first night. Thus, on the second day they went out for the same hunt. This time, they lost 9 of their companions. No matter how stupid the ogres were, they knew that something was amiss. There had been ogres who had gone out to hunt, but because they had gone too far, it took them 2 to 3 days before they could return. But that was a rare exception. And now, in one breath, there were 9 ogre warriors that did not return to camp. No matter how one looked at it, this was a sneak attack on them. Unfortunately, as the number of missing ogre warriors far exceeded the number of fingers and toes of the ogre leaders, the ogre leader could not keep track of the number. Thus, when he reported to the twin-headed ogre wizard Zack, he used the word many to describe it. Regarding the frequent disappearance of the warriors under his command, Zack was also infuriated and exceptionally furious. As he roared in anger, a few ogre leaders came up with a plan, all of them targeting the Abebe people. As the Abebe bee people expanded wildly, their hunting territories overlapped with the ogres' hunting areas. Both sides had many conflicts in the overlapping areas, and they had fought several times. Thus, when the ogres encountered this unknown attack, their first thought was that the Abebe bee people were behind it. With the encouragement of the leaders, the twin-headed ogre wizard Zack went berserk. When the sun rose on the second day, a large group of ogres led by Zack rushed down the giant Hammer Mountain, killing their way into the Abebe bee people's territory. In a dark and damp underground cave, more than a dozen bug nests made of a mixture of blood, wood chips, and mud stood tall in the middle of the cave, covered in fist-sized holes. Through the holes, one could clearly see that the insect nests were filled with squirming scorpion larvae and piles of bloody corpses. Blitz, who had regained his human form, stood in the middle of the insect nests, sizing up the larvae that were about to become his subordinates. As the blood in the cave expanded, Blitz's body, which was hidden under his black robe, underwent subtle changes. His human skin had been replaced by a layer of pitch-black carapace, and his hands had become a pair of large chelicerae that flickered with a metallic luster. On his chest and abdomen, 3 pairs of sickle-shaped appendages curled together. What was even more shocking was Blitz's head. The incessant swelling of his head tore apart the skin on his face. His mouth, nose, and eyes were slanted to one side, revealing a dark, sinister, and terrifying face. Dark green compound eyes, sinister and horrifying lotus-shaped mouthparts, and 2 strange antennae that stood tall, it could be seen that Blitz was very determined and thorough in the evolution of the bugmen. There wasn't much of a human left on his body. With the deepening of his insecticide transformation, Blitz had already silently crossed the threshold of a high-ranking acolyte, using a month or 2 to catch up to the height that demonic worm in tech had spent 6 to 7 years to reach. Even high-ranking acolyte wasn't the end of his evolution. As the larvae in the insect nests devoured large amounts of blood and food, Blitz's aura rose along with it. When the larvae in the 12 insect nests had successfully matured into young scorpions, they didn't choose to break out of their nest. Instead, they fought each other in close proximity. To Blitz, the young scorpions were still too weak, and weren't suitable to be part of the insect army that followed him into battle. Hence, after completely sweeping through the surrounding magic creature nests, Blitz set the end point of the insect swarm's evolution as mature scorpions. Under his crazed and excited gaze, the 12 nests started a bloody and cruel process of devouring and evolving. Every young scorpion had their own consciousness and instincts. Of course, they didn't want their budding consciousness to become the cornerstone of someone else's evolution. Hence, the slaughter in every nest was extremely cruel and bloody, even to the point of insanity. Under Blitz's strict orders, only the strongest surviving larva in each nest had the chance to grow and evolve. Hence, they crazily used every weapon on their bodies to attack every living being around them. This evolutionary battle that took place in a remote corner took a full 2 hours before it slowly ended. As the insect nests collapsed, 12 bloodied adult scorpions with incomplete carapaces crawled out of the mounds and gathered around Blitz. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.